Even though the other party held a noble status and formidable strength, Jian Wushuang couldn't muster much interest. Some of these individuals were unaware, while others, like the emperor prodigies, had some inkling of the truth. Take Jian Wushuang, for instance. He cast a friendly glance towards the eldest princess. Princess Jincheng, catching Jian Wushuang's gaze, shot him a fierce glare. While she recognized the 100 flowers vine Jian Wushuang produced, she didn't believe Jian Wushuang to be particularly powerful. Instead, she thought his background was definitely more complex than it appeared. Jian Wushuang, however, remained unfazed by her gaze, merely smiling in response. Meanwhile, those emperor prodigies with strong backgrounds in the Yu Kingdom also began to display their own demeanor and strength. Each of them was eager to try. This puzzled some of the ordinary emperor prodigies. They simply couldn't understand why these well-established emperor prodigies, who had both background and power, insisted on marrying a princess who seemed like nothing special. Information. The importance of information was fully realized at this moment. Not only did they know that the princess's true identity was not as it seemed now, but they also understood the benefits that marrying her would bring. The spots in the Saint Gathering Sacred Assembly. In the entire Yu Kingdom, there were probably only a few. The Yu royal family, Qingyun sect, Mingjiao, and the 10 major families. Divided evenly, each family probably only had one spot. Surely, those spots would go to the formidable Tribulation Realm experts. If there were 2, they could consider giving one to an emperor. The key was that among the 10 major families, there were differences in strength. Perhaps only 1 or 2 families could secure 2 spots. The other families would have to figure something out. Half of the Sacred Assembly comprised emperors, and the other half comprised Tribulation Realm experts. It is best to have 2 spots. For families like the Wus, who are relatively low-ranking, they only have 1 spot, and that spot is also because of Wu Li's status. Out of 20 spots in a nation, families occupy at least half. The remaining spots are divided among the 3 major powers, and each spot is extremely precious. There simply isn't any surplus. That's why the competition is so fierce. The method of selecting a son-in-law is also simple. Anyone who comes to this place today, including the emperor, is qualified to participate. But ultimately, it's decided by strength. The backgrounds of the emperors who can come here have all been thoroughly investigated, leaving only a competition of strength. When Mukin saw that some people were still not very active, he mentioned, "There's one more thing I almost forgot to mention. The Saint Gathering of the Ancient Wood Continent will be held soon. Among the 20 spots allocated to the Yu Kingdom, one will be for a son-in-law." Upon hearing this, the weaker forces looked at each other. The Saint Gathering Sacred Assembly. It's the conference for electing the Holy Maiden. Normally, they would just go to watch the excitement at most. Even if they were given spots, their families wouldn't have suitable candidates to participate. The candidate for the Holy Maiden must be a universe master and also a female cultivator. Just this threshold blocks off 99% of the strong. Why bring up the matter of recruiting a son-in-law now? This time, it wasn't Mukin's turn to explain. The Empress spoke up personally. This Saint Gathering is extraordinary, and it's related to the Divine Wood King. You should all take the opportunity to learn more. Divine Wood King. At the mention of this title, everyone was shaken. Even Jian Wushuang frowned. He hadn't heard Wu Li mention that this Saint Conference would involve the Divine Wood King. Although Wu Li's information was very well informed, he didn't know that this Saint Conference was related to the Divine Wood King. As for this name, Jian Wushuang had known about it since he first went to the Qingyun sect. As long as practitioners who know a little about the ancient Wood sect, they all know. From the Tribulation Realm to the mundane world. They all know what the God Wood King represents. He is the ancestor of the ancient Wood sect, a powerful figure who was crowned king. The strong who can be crowned king are all ancestors of the 8-star sections. If an ancestor falls, the title can be inherited. The superpowers of the 8th Tribulation Realm. Jian Wushuang held his breath. If this sacred meeting really had something to do with the Wood King, then his matters with Wu Li might not proceed so easily. They were experts of the 8th Tribulation Realm. Although they were scattered in the tribulation realm and lacked the grandeur of the cosmic Tao arena, they were not the kind of small fries that they could peek at. In general, when the sacred meeting identifies candidates for the Holy Maiden, at most, they could mobilize a 7 tribulation realm expert from the ancient Wood sect, which was considered good. Now, with the involvement of the divine Wood King, it was likely that the old ancestor would appear. This also meant that this sacred meeting was not only for the Holy Maiden candidates but also for other actions. Both Wu Li and Jian Wushuang showed shock on their faces, exchanging a glance. The Empress was present, so they dared not say much. They could only endure and discuss privately after the banquet. However, Jian Wushuang couldn't let go of the matter of becoming the son-in-law. This sacred gathering was of extraordinary significance, and there would be a lot of movement. Even if the divine Wood King appeared, they had to go and try together. Even if they couldn't activate the Wanlu divine tree, they still had to attend the sacred meeting. Wu Li had participated in many sacred meetings, so it might not be a big deal to him. But Jian Wushuang had just arrived in the ancient moon spacetime. He couldn't afford to miss such a sacred meeting. Whoosh! The crowd was shocked. After a moment, the Empress took out a piece of heaven and earth from her palm, placing it directly in the center of the banquet hall. All the guests around could see it clearly. The message was clear: no need for further words. Those who had the ability should step forward. At this moment, Mukin smiled and stood up, entering the heavenly realm. He spoke, "All esteemed nephews and nieces, you may enter. Just hold out for a quarter of an hour in this realm. After entering, you can act as you please, without any restraint." Obviously, this time it wasn't just one person selected, but a group. Holding out for a quarter of an hour couldn't be done by just one person. It might require several. Moreover, they could even act against each other, making it more interesting. As Mukin's voice fell, the emperor among the guests couldn't contain himself. "My son, go with confidence and hold out for a quarter of an hour." Yes, not only the descendants of the family but also the tribulation realm powerhouses within the Qingyun sect allowed their disciples to go forward. Becoming a son-in-law meant obtaining a spot in the sacred assembly. Such crucial spots were limited to 20 in the entire Yu Kingdom. Usually, when not taken seriously, half of the emperors could go, leaving the rest to the tribulation realm experts. However, this time was different from usual. Most likely, most forces would let the tribulation realm experts go. After all, there were too few emperors who defied the heavens, especially when compared to other dynasties and kingdoms. Yu Kingdom was too small. Just like now, half of the powerful emperors within the Yu Kingdom were present, and Jian Wushuang didn't see anyone who seemed to defy the heavens. Unlike the divine generals of the Qixin Temple back then. "Wushuang, you go too." Wu Li's expression was solemn, pretending to be profound. Only then did Jian Wushuang stand up, bow respectfully, and then enter that realm. For a moment, several streaks of light flew in. 100 people had entered. The powerhouses in the hall then focused their gaze on these emperor juniors. Tiestes. Each generation seems to be worse than the last. Pang De smacked his lips and said, "There's not a single decent one among them. How can they compare to the emperor of Shi Kingdom, who defies the heavens?" Although the words were harsh, they were also true. But now, with different perspectives, Wu Li retorted, "I think these youngsters are not bad at all. At least they are much stronger than we were back then." Other powerful figures from the tribulation realm who brought their juniors with them also chimed in agreement. "Haha, Pangda, I remember when you were still an emperor, your divine power was only 90,000-fold. Look at these youngsters. Which one of them isn't stronger than you? They are the future." Pangda just shook his head with a contemptuous smile. He had been roaming in Shi Kingdom for a long time, and his insights far surpassed those of these people. In Shi Kingdom, the emperor who defied the heavens, not to mention the top ones, even the ordinary geniuses could erupt their divine power to more than 100,000-fold. Now, looking at those emperors below, whether they could reach 100,000 times was still a question. Not to mention breaking through 100,000-fold. In the entire Yu Kingdom, it was widely acknowledged that the strongest was the Grand Princess. But now, she was choosing her husband based on martial prowess. It was quite ironic when you thought about it. If you insist on fishing in such a shallow pond as Yu Kingdom, what can you catch? Although Pangda was straightforward by nature, he didn't say much about it. He knew what these people were thinking. When Mukin saw that most people had arrived, he withdrew and, after glancing at the Empress, spoke. Now let's begin officially. Buzz. The world of the cave began to close off. However, the people in the main hall could still see clearly. Jian Wushuang, who entered the cave world, didn't notice anything special at first. As the cave sealed off, his body gradually felt heavier, but it was bearable. According to his calculations, even if the gravity increased continuously for a quarter of an hour, it wouldn't pose too much threat to them. He chose a spot closer to the edge. At this moment, they hadn't yet felt the pressure and looked around. Friends, I think there's no need for us to act. Why don't we wait for a quarter of an hour? Said the young patriarch of one of the top 10 families in Great Yu, the Zhang family. Although he was just a young patriarch, his strength was only average, with his divine power at around 95,000-fold. If we don't act, everyone can withstand this slight increase in gravity for the duration of an incense stick. What will happen then? Won't we still have to contend? Jiang Tianyang's complexion changed slightly, and his aura began to rise. Originally, he had intended to stabilize these people first because his strength was already considered top-notch among them, and he would definitely be besieged. Choosing the son-in-law this time, if strength really mattered that much, why bother looking for them? It was just a pretext. Among them, there were also those who were aware, either through their own understanding or through the reminder of their family's strong figures, of the reasons behind the situation. Attack! Boom! Instantly, 3 emperors made their move. Their target? The young master of the family. These 3 individuals were quite formidable, their divine power soaring to around 90,000-fold in an instant. With these 3 leading the charge, more and more groups of fighters emerged in succession. Jian Wushuang didn't stand out, so he wasn't targeted. Some even proposed joining forces with him to take on the strongest prodigies. But Jian Wushuang had no intention of doing so. Their speculations weren't entirely off base, or rather, the speculations of those in the tribulation realm weren't entirely wrong. However, Jian Wushuang received a message from Wu Li. Don't hold back too much. Try to defeat everyone as much as possible. This selection process wasn't as simple as it seemed on the surface. Jian Wushuang's figure flickered, always skirting the edges of the battlefield. In just a moment, several people left the scene. All were heavily injured from being besieged, taken away by strong figures in the tribulation realm. In the Great Hall, the Empress sighed softly. These people were still too weak. She valued strength, even if it meant finding a son-in-law for her daughter from the royal family. They couldn't afford to be too weak. Background could be a weakness, but strength couldn't be lacking too much. This time, the selection of a son-in-law wasn't as straightforward as outsiders perceived. Elder Mukin also understood the Empress's intentions and discreetly communicated. Your Majesty, I have already made arrangements within the palace. There might be no need to select from the Yu Kingdom. No, we must choose from among them. Those you arranged can handle the people from the Shi Kingdom, but they are not suitable to marry into the royal family. Their backgrounds are not clean. Yes, Mukin didn't say much more. They waited quietly for the situation inside the cave. At this moment, Jian Wushuang's performance was subtle, and his strength was the most deeply hidden among these people. Almost none of them knew Jian Wushuang, only inquiring about him after he revealed the 100 Flowers vine previously. However, asking around the surrounding people yielded little information. Jian Wushuang, are you planning to sit back and watch the show? As people continued to leave, the number had now halved. Many also made time to look at Jian Wushuang. Jian Wushuang stopped, feeling the increasingly terrifying gravity. He knew very well that if he didn't act soon, these people would lose their combat effectiveness. It was time for him to perform. You'd better leave now. Jian Wushuang clenched his fists, and his aura began to erupt. A dark red light covered his body, crimson arcs representing the power of the beast god. His divine power began to rise continuously. Increased gravity was a great help to the stronger emperors. Jiang Tianyang escaped from the siege of several people, and he began to confront others. He had thought the battle was almost over, and it was now a matter of endurance. He didn't expect Jian Wushuang to prepare to strike at this moment. And the emperors who were blocking Jian Wushuang also looked sideways. They could feel Jian Wushuang's divine power instantly soaring to 90,000-fold. His divine power should be around 97,000-fold. Jiang Tianyang stared at Jian Wushuang, sneering at those who were specifically attacking them with stronger strength. Humph! This time, you've hit a dead end. Jiang Tianyang, under the peak secret technique, could briefly erupt to 98,900-fold divine power, ranking among the top 3 among these emperors. There were 2 others whose divine power could reach 99,000-fold thousand. The rest was Jian Wushuang. He had never been able to see through Jian Wushuang. Now that Jian Wushuang was erupting with divine power, he could sense that Jian Wushuang's strength was extremely powerful, probably not inferior to his own. The emperors who were preparing to besiege Jian Wushuang also stopped. But Jian Wushuang didn't stop. His divine power soared all the way. If he didn't suppress it, it would have broken through 100,000-fold long ago. It's important to note that his basic divine power now was close to 100,000-fold. Coupled with the beast god's power, he could easily break through 100,000-fold, even reaching 130,000-fold. But there was no need for that, it was just for fun. Ah! Jian Wushuang, unaffected by gravity, soared into the air, his fists bursting out fiercely, and he howled to the sky. His divine power directly broke through 100,000-fold, becoming the strongest emperor on the field. How is it possible? His divine power has actually broken through to 100,000-fold. Jiang Tianyang couldn't believe it. The emperors who surrounded Jian Wushuang were even more shocked, their faces turning pale. 100,000-fold divine power. In Yu Kingdom, this was already considered a top-notch emperor. Even the strong individuals in the hall who had reached the Tribulation Realm couldn't help but glance at Wu Li, understanding why he had offered such a powerful treasure. So he truly had that confidence. 100,000-fold divine power was more than enough to marry into the royal family. The Grand Princess Jinxin also stared at Jian Wushuang, somewhat surprised but still not optimistic about his strength. The outside world only knew that her divine power could reach 100,000-fold times. But they didn't know that after her secret method breakthrough, her explosive divine power could rival those geniuses from the Sure Kingdom. 100,000-fold was just a foundation. But for the emperors below who didn't even have enough divine power to match that, Jian Wushuang's strength was already sufficient. Mukin was becoming more and more satisfied with Jian Wushuang, not only because of the effect of the treasure. From a comprehensive perspective of strength and background, Jian Wushuang was perfect. Although not an emperor of Yu Kingdom, his relationship with Wu Li was significant. He had a strong backing in Yu Kingdom, his strength was not weak, and he looked very young. He was one of the most suitable candidates. Wu Li, your nephew is quite impressive. Even Pangde couldn't help but praise. Emperors with 100,000-fold divine power were rare. Yu Kingdom probably didn't even have 3. Even in the Sure Kingdom, they were considered geniuses. Wu Li smiled on the surface, but inside, he sneered. If Jian Wushuang truly unleashed his full power, there would be no more than 10 people present who could be his opponents. And that was including the Empress and those strong individuals at the 4 Tribulation Realm. He calculated his strength and believed that Wu Li's combat power could rank in the top 10 in the main hall. So he naturally assumed that Jian Wushuang's strength was not weaker than his and could also enter the top 10. Jian Wushuang's divine power erupted, directly suppressing everyone in the cave sky. Even if they weren't suppressed under the influence of the weight, these people couldn't move. Everyone, my apologies. Jian Wushuang casually flicked his hand, directly shaking several emperors out of the battlefield. Even under such gravity, shaking these people away meant they had no chance. They understood very well that without 100,000-fold divine power, they couldn't even move their bodies under this gravity. They were like fish on a chopping board, only able to be slaughtered by Jian Wushuang. It was better to voluntarily withdraw than to continue like this. Jian Wushuang, with such strength, Tianyang, admire you. I willingly withdraw. Jiang Tianyang spoke and chose to retreat, being teleported away directly. The others hesitated for a moment and then followed suit, withdrawing one by one. In less than 15 minutes, only Jian Wushuang was left in the cave sky. Indeed, they know what's good for them. Jian Wushuang revealed a hint of a smile. Compared to these emperors, this was nothing more than child's play. With over 90,000-fold divine power, he was almost comparable to some newly ascended Tribulation Realm beings. If he were in the Qixin Temple, he would definitely be among the peak existences. But compared to the entire Yu Kingdom, he was still lacking. Even the Moro spacetime from before probably could only match one of the continents in the Ancient Moon spacetime. Ancient Moon spacetime, 9 heavens and 10 lands. 10 ancient continents, 9 great heavens. Being able to match one of them was considered not bad. This was one of the 9 temporal rivers, the strongest in the starry sky. After everyone voluntarily withdrew, Jian Wushuang became the only candidate left. The Empress naturally closed the cave sky and released Jian Wushuang. Would King take him to the palace later? I will leave first. The Empress was mainly here for this matter. Now that it was concluded, she was satisfied with Jian Wushuang and got up to leave with the somewhat reluctant Crown Princess Jinchen. Once again, everyone respectfully bid farewell. After the Empress left, the pressure in the main hall dissipated. Mukin directly gestured for Jian Wushuang to come up and sit beside him. Jian Wushuang obediently went to Wu Li's side and respectfully greeted Elder Mukin with clasped fists. After the banquet ends, let's rest for a moment in the mansion with Brother Wu Li. I have some questions to ask you, Elder Mukin said calmly. He needed to confirm Jian Wushuang's identity and strength once again. This naturally wasn't a problem. Without waiting for Jian Wushuang to speak, Wu Li directly agreed. Jian Wushuang then sat down next to Wu Li accordingly. And the banquet continued. During the banquet, discussions about the sacred assembly made everyone particularly lively. In the past, it hadn't been this bustling. After all, many of the 3 Tribulation Realm powerhouses present here had participated in the sacred assembly before. To be eligible to attend the sacred assembly, the weakest among them needed to be a 3 Tribulation Realm universe master. As for the Emperor, there weren't many requirements. After all, going there would still grant them some ancient secrets and techniques from the ancient Wood sect, laying the foundation for their future Tribulation Realm. But this time was somewhat different. The emergence of the divine Wood King. Surely the ancient Wood sect would be in an uproar. However, this time nobody knew why the divine Wood King had appeared. So it was best to reserve some extra slots for the Tribulation Realm experts. Jian Wushuang listened on the side, feeling somewhat worried. At this moment, Wu Li transmitted a message. Don't worry. Out of the 20 spots from Yu Kingdom, at least 30% will be given to the Emperor. Right now, we're just one step away from entering the Imperial Palace to see what the royal family is up to. Once you marry into the royal family, the spots won't be an issue. Will the emergence of the divine Wood King pose any resistance? You've just arrived in the ancient Wood continent, so you might not know. Even at his peak, the divine Wood King couldn't reach the pinnacle of the 8th Tribulation Realm. He was just an ordinary 8th Tribulation Realm expert. After his Dao arena collapsed, he lost his 8th Tribulation Realm combat power. Since then, he's been barely hanging on, maintaining a half-step 8th Tribulation Realm at best. The treasures within the Wanlu Willow Divine Wood are more coveted by him than us. If we were to unlock the Wanlu Divine Tree, not only would he not obstruct us, he might even beg us to help him find the treasures to restore his vitality. These things, Wu Li heard them from that mistress, and they were probably true. The 10,000 Willows Divine Tree, that's the core of the ancient Wood continent. The ancient Wood sect was established after the fall of the Celestial Maiden, but the Wanlu Willows existed since the era of the Celestial Maiden. There's simply no comparison. Even the ancient Wood sect desires to enter the depths of the Wanlu Divine Tree, but every time they can only wander on the periphery, unable to penetrate into the very core. To truly have great opportunities, one must enter the deepest parts. When Jian Wushuang heard this, he felt a surge of excitement in his heart. Life power. The universe master of the 8 tribulation realm can naturally give birth to an endless stream of life power, but the burden of the scattered tribulation realm is too great. The life power consumed in one strike would probably require countless epochs of slumber to replenish. Even powerhouses like the divine Wood King who founded the ancient Wood sect couldn't sustain it. This made him think of Mieshang. Could Mieshang also be a scattered tribulation realm expert? Back then, being able to slay Dong Jun meant surpassing at least the 7 tribulation realm. After the destruction of higher heavens, Mieshang entered the Moro spacetime, only retaining the strength of a half-step 7 tribulation realm. Upon entering the temporal river of the original universe, Mieshang's strength could only maintain the level of the 6th tribulation realm. Before he left, Mieshang transformed into the Temple of World Annihilation. If Mieshang truly had no worries, why would he enter the Temple of World Annihilation instead of directly besieging the Qixin Temple? Perhaps he also had some kind of flaw. Just like Jinling had the origin source C, which could sustain vitality indefinitely. Plus, when he left, he helped Jinling restore the flesh of the Qixin. Just maintaining the vitality of the flesh alone took him a very long time. If he were truly a scattered 7 tribulations, he would probably have spent countless epochs. That's not something a 6 tribulation realm could compare to. An 8 tribulation realm with severe vitality loss. Jian Wushuang was speechless. For a moment, in a daze, it was time for the banquet to disperse. 10 minutes past midnight. Looking up, the stars in the sky glittered brightly. These visible lights were not stars, but universes. Each universe represented a master of the 3 tribulations. In the starry sky, Jian Wushuang saw several dazzling universes, immense and vast. They should be universes of the 7 tribulations. As for the 8 tribulation universe masters, they should still exist in the Moro spacetime, but they couldn't be seen at all. Those old guys could either incorporate the universe into their bodies or hide it in the chaos of spacetime, making it impossible for outsiders to find. Wu Li and Jian Wushuang stood panting, waiting for Mukin in a courtyard of the Wood King's mansion. Wushuang, lost in thought? Wu Li looked at Jian Wushuang staring into the sky, at a loss for words. Jian Wushuang shook his head and said, "Not really, just thinking. Will the formation of these universes become a constraint on the tribulation realm? Haha, you have a lot of thoughts, brother. But there is some truth to it. The universes are born above the ancient Wood continent and cannot be moved unless they become the 8 tribulation realm." Wu Li also looked up at the stars, able to see his own universe at a glance, then continued, "I once thought the same, but now, at this stage, where is there such lofty ambition? If I can reach the 5 tribulation realm in my lifetime, I will be satisfied. Yet, the stronger one becomes, the clearer their future becomes." For Wu Li, a universe master at the half-step 4 tribulation realm, breaking through to this level was already quite commendable. Ever since he gained control over the universe, Wu Li had accumulated countless epochs, and it wasn't long before he would face his next tribulation. With his current strength and foundation, he had little to worry about. However, upon reaching the 4 tribulation realm, anxiety started creeping in. Despite his current combat prowess, advancing through the tribulation earlier was feasible. Yet, once he succeeded in this tribulation and reached the 4 tribulation realm, he had no certainty of overcoming the 5th tribulation. Rather than rushing to break through, he decided to accumulate more strength and experience. At least when the opportunity of the 5th tribulation presents itself, he would attempt the 4th tribulation. Many peak 3rd tribulation experts shared this sentiment. But in the end, forced tribulations became inevitable. Upon reaching the 4 tribulation realm, lacking any fortuitous encounters, they could only anxiously wait. Eventually, they would become disheartened, falling into solitary cultivation. Jian Wushuang sighed inwardly, but he wasn't particularly troubled. Controlling the universe meant his existence wasn't confined to the ancient moon spacetime. Instead, the universe condensed within his own body. That was the advantage of the extreme Tao. He wasn't bound by the rule laws of this particular realm. However, it wasn't as easy for the others who accompanied him to the ancient moon spacetime. After reaching the tribulation realm, they were likely to establish themselves in the ancient moon spacetime. Even if they returned to the original universe, they would ultimately find themselves back in the ancient moon spacetime. Establishing themselves meant becoming part of the ancient moon spacetime. Jian Wushuang shook his head, pushing these thoughts aside. What mattered now was securing their spots. Time was running out for them. The sacred assembly would take place in just 10 years, as per the recent information Wu Li had received. Creak. The door to the courtyard creaked open, revealing Elder Mukin. However, the current Elder Mukin appeared far from the spirited figure seen in the main hall, instead showing signs of aging. Mukin, Elder Mukin! Elder Mukin! The two hurried forward to greet him. Elder Mukin waved his hand casually, saying, "There are no outsiders here. No need for formalities. Sit down and let's talk." The three of them sat in a pavilion, and Wu Li demonstrated his attentiveness by pouring tea for Mukin and Jian Wushuang. Cough! Elder Mukin didn't hesitate to take a sip of tea. Jian Wushuang and Wu Li waited for Elder Mukin to speak. With tea drank and everyone gathered, Elder Mukin adjusted his robes and got straight to the point. "Since we are all insiders, I won't hide anything from you. This time, the recruitment of a son-in-law is a last resort." As Elder Mukin recounted the situation, Jian Wushuang and Wu Li listened in amazement. It turned out that Princess Jincheng, since childhood, had lived with her grandfather in the Shi Kingdom and only returned to Yu Kingdom after becoming an immortal talent. During her mortal years, she had been engaged to a prodigy from Shi Kingdom. However, with the rise of the Empress, the future imperial throne was likely to be Princess Jincheng's, and the engagement was put on hold. If it were that simple, there wouldn't have been so many troubling times afterward. That prodigy from Shi Kingdom was no ordinary person. He was a scion of the royal family, with a background that couldn't be overlooked despite not being a direct heir. For a scion of Shi Kingdom's royal family to marry into another kingdom would bring shame upon Shi Kingdom. Yet, both parties were unwilling to let go. The prodigy had even chased after Princess Jincheng to Yu Kingdom and was currently in the imperial palace. Furthermore, he had made it clear that he would agree to call off the engagement only if the emperor who married Princess Jincheng could defeat him. Jian Wushuang furrowed his brows upon hearing this and remarked, "He's quite persistent. Unfortunately, the royal family of Yu Kingdom wouldn't allow this marriage. Whether it was for the dignity of Shi Kingdom or the power of the royal family of Yu Kingdom, Princess Jincheng's marriage to him was impossible. However, since they had known each other since childhood, forcibly breaking them apart wouldn't be easy." "Indeed," Elder Mukin shook his head, saying, "Blame it on our current emperor. He insisted on sending that little girl to Shi Kingdom for training. Now that she's grown up, he doesn't understand the struggles of the royal family. One from the royal family of Shi Kingdom, the other a legitimate heir of Yu Kingdom's royal family. In terms of background and strength, they were a suitable match. But marriage was out of the question. Yu Kingdom feared inviting trouble, while Shirgua feared losing face. The latter could be overcome, but the former was absolutely unacceptable. No matter what, they couldn't allow a scion of Shi Kingdom's royal family to marry into Yu Kingdom. It was a matter that threatened the imperial power. "Elder, just tell me what needs to be done." Jian Wushuang seemed to understand the implication. Wu Li also stared at Mukin. "In fact, it's simple. Defeat that prodigy from Shi Kingdom and make him give up," Elder Mukin said. Upon hearing this, Wu Li felt a surge of relief. That sounded too easy. But Mukin didn't know Jian Wushuang's true strength. He was still worried and couldn't bring himself to discourage Jian Wushuang. In the Shi Kingdom, there was a prodigy named Shi Jiao with formidable strength. Mukin expressed his concern. Jian Wushuang furrowed his brows slightly. If even Elder Mukin was acknowledging someone's strength, it definitely warranted serious attention. However, Wu Li seemed even more confident than Jian Wushuang. He patted his chest assuredly, saying, "You can rest assured, Brother Mukin. Since we're all here, let me be straightforward. My nephew may have struggled in the outer domain, but his strength is unquestionable. Have either of you heard of the fifth young master of the Shi family?" Mukin didn't respond to Wu Li directly, but instead mentioned a prominent figure from the neighboring country. Upon hearing this, Wu Li pondered for a moment before exclaiming, "Are you referring to Xianxia from the Shi Kingdom?" "Yes, precisely." Mukin nodded. "The prodigy from the Shi Kingdom is his grandson." This time, even Wu Li furrowed his brow. "His grandson? Why haven't I heard of him? I just found out myself. He has an illegitimate child, who happens to be Shi Jiu's father. This information is known to very few. A friend of mine just told me." Mukin shook his head with a sigh. If it weren't for the royal family needing a son-in-law, he would have been quite interested in the prodigy from the Shi Kingdom. That was Xianxia. In the Shi Kingdom, he was a truly influential figure and a backbone of the royal family. The reason why the Shi Kingdom could dominate over the 16 kingdoms in this era, even rivaling powerful sects like the ancient Wu sect, was because of this influential figure. He was a universe master at the half-step 7 tribulation realm. In the future, he was the most promising figure in the ancient Wu continent to advance to the status of a universe master at the 7 tribulations realm. Seeing Wu Li's expression, Elder Mukin lifted his teacup, took a sip, thinking he had startled Wu Li. This piece of news had indeed stunned Wu Li, who immediately sent a private message to Jian Wushuang. "When we go to the palace later, let's be extra cautious. His background is too significant for us to afford to offend." If Elder Mukin had heard this, he might have been utterly flabbergasted. After all, this was Xiao's grandson. Although Xiao had many grandsons with the bloodline of a half-step 7 tribulations realm powerhouse like Xiao, how weak could they be? Jian Wushuang couldn't help but feel that Wu Li was overestimating him. Under normal circumstances, he would be outmatched without using the power of the beast god. He had experienced the true divine power of the princess, with a staggering force of 130,000-fold. For the princess of the Shi Kingdom, who was so devoted, the opponent's divine power would probably be around 150,000-fold. He would need to exert twice the power of the beast god just to suppress his opponent. To defeat them, he would need 3 times the power. In the Qixin Temple, only the Tribulation Realm could allow him to exert such power. An emperor becoming so formidable. The Kingdom of Yu wouldn't tolerate an emperor of such strength. "How about it? Are you confident?" Elder Mukin straightforwardly asked. "Jian Wushuang, can you reach 130,000-fold divine power?" Jian Wushuang also understood Mukin's intentions. Immediately, he stood up and unleashed the power of the beast god within him. Buzz! His base divine power, from white flames, directly transformed into dark red, soaring from less than 100,000-fold to 130,000-fold. By utilizing the power of the beast god, he could now reach 130,000-fold divine power. If he used double the beast god power, it would be 160,000-fold. The limit of 3 times would reach 200,000-fold. This was his current peak under normal circumstances. If he were to use the power of the starry sky and employ the eternal ancient transformation, it wouldn't be comparable in terms of divine power. After all, he was a practitioner of space-time, and he had already gained recognition from time. If he were to use the eternal ancient transformation, it would arouse suspicion from outsiders. He refrained from using his full power if he could help it. His peak divine strength was sufficient among the emperors. At the peak, he reached the standard combat power of the 3 tribulation realm. Throughout the ancient moon spacetime, only the great divine official mentioned by Wu Li possessed the combat power of a 3 tribulation realm universe master. As long as his luck wasn't too bad, he wouldn't encounter an emperor as eccentric as that. Sensing that Jian Wushuang's divine power exceeded 130,000-fold, Mukin nodded in satisfaction, not particularly surprised. The fact that Wu Li could produce such precious treasures meant he definitely had some strength. Otherwise, the treasures would have been given away for nothing. "Nephew, with this level of strength I can rest assured. However, I must make something clear beforehand. I have 3 people prepared within the palace now. Regardless of whether they win or lose, it has nothing to do with Jinshin. You can rest assured about this. However, I don't have much confidence in those 3 either. The main thing depends on you." Mukin revealed a bit of his bottom line to the 2. Wu Li chuckled. "They're all our own nephews. It won't be long before we become relatives by marriage. With the matter settled, the three didn't linger and left the Wood King's mansion directly, heading for the palace. The kingdom of Yu, the palace. It was high above the clouds in the royal city. Ordinary people couldn't even see what the palace looked like. Jian Wushuang followed Mukin's guidance to reach the main gate of the palace. Otherwise, he wouldn't even be able to find the door. No wonder he couldn't sense the powerful individuals inside the palace when he entered the royal city. Now, outside the gate, he could feel a faint pressure. The aura was majestic. Your Highness. The guards at the gate were all formidable figures of the tribulation realm. Such grandeur. Guided by the attendants, Jian Wushuang and the others entered the imperial palace. Only after entering did Jian Wushuang truly understand the power of the tribulation realm. What they saw here resembled the peak era of the Moro spacetime. Although the Qixin Temple claimed to inherit the ancient Moro spacetime, it paled in comparison to this place. In the Eastern Palace, within the Crown Prince's residence. Smack! Inside the Dongxing Hall, Princess Jincheng had reverted to her true appearance. The maiden Jian Wushuang had seen. At this moment, Princess Jincheng, in front of the Empress, smashed the pillar in the hall with a single palm. I won't marry anyone except him. Princess Jincheng's temper flared, unstoppable by anyone. Empress Fengchen furrowed her brows, glaring at Jincheng, and angrily shouted, You won't marry? I won't. Even if I ascend to the throne, I won't marry anyone. Swish! The Empress's figure instantly appeared before Princess Jincheng, and with a flick of her hand, she delivered a slap because her words had touched the Empress's limit. The sound was crisp. Princess Jincheng froze, staring at the eyes so similar to Empress Fengchen's, watery and teary. You hit me. Jincheng couldn't believe it. Her mother, though cold to others, had never treated her like this. Empress Fengchen coldly said, You won't take the throne? She wanted to burst into laughter. Countless eyes were fixed on the throne of Yu Kingdom. Once seated, the royal family would have access to abundant resources. With Princess Jincheng's potential, she would soon reach the three tribulation realm and command the universe. But in the later stages, countless resources would be needed. These resources only the royal family could afford in Yu Kingdom, but even if they could afford it, it depended on the person. Becoming the imperial emperor of Yu Kingdom naturally gave one that qualification. Becoming the empress meant the beginning of a journey towards becoming a powerhouse in the four tribulation realm. To sit as the fourth and aim for the fifth, this was a dream that many pursued but few achieved. How could she not understand this? In this world, emotions mattered little. One's strength couldn't keep up, one would be scorned. This was an eternal truth. In the future, when one became a scattered tribulation and the other a flourishing universe master, regret would be too late. Gazing into her mother's cold eyes, Jincheng dared not argue further. This matter is not up to you, but I can give you one promise. After you ascend to the throne and become a powerhouse in the tribulation realm, I will no longer interfere with you. This statement gave Jincheng a glimmer of hope, albeit an excuse. Jincheng was clever enough to grasp her mother's intentions swiftly. She could marry someone she didn't like. They could live separately, and even after reaching the four tribulation realm, she could still seek out her Shurjiu. Yet, even so, she was somewhat unwilling. When would that be? She was only an emperor now. There was still a long way to go before reaching the tribulation realm. Breaking through to the tribulation realm would lead to swift advancement to the three tribulation stage, but reaching the four tribulation stage wouldn't be so easy. Shurjiu, can you wait for me? Jincheng silently prayed in her heart. Meanwhile, just as Jian Wushuang and his companions arrived outside the hall, they noticed two others waiting there as well. One was old, the other young. Jian Wushuang couldn't gauge the old man's strength, but he seemed stronger than Wu Li, yet not by much. He had little vitality, indicating he wasn't a universe master but rather a scattered tribulation. Standing beside him was a young man, exuding an aura of nobility, with a firm and meticulous appearance. It seemed that this person was the genius of the Shur Kingdom, Shurjiu. As the three of them steadied themselves, another three individuals arrived. They were all emperors, presumably the three emperors arranged by Elder Mukin. They were extraordinary emperors brought in from other kingdoms. Such matters could be easily resolved with a bit of money. However, due to royal dignity, the Wang clan didn't go too overboard. As for those within Yu Kingdom, they were persuaded to withdraw. There were those who exceeded 10,000 times in strength, but the difference in power was too vast. Calculating it this way, the four challengers to the prodigies of the Shi Kingdom this time, each one being from Yu Kingdom, was ironic enough when spoken aloud. Fortunately, Wu Li had foresight and had arranged Jian Wushuang to make an appearance in Qingyun's sect early on, and under Elder Mukin's guidance, he could now be considered a person of Yu Kingdom. Lord Mukin. The three emperors greeted Elder Mukin with respect. After all, Elder Mukin had summoned them. But since there were outsiders present, Elder Mukin didn't say much, just nodded faintly. The three of them glanced at Jian Wushuang at first, but since they didn't notice anything remarkable about him, they paid him no further attention and instead focused on Shizhou himself. He was the real adversary. Your Majesty, summon everyone, and follow me. Soon, a soft-spoken old man in a black robe and tall hat emerged from the hall and summoned everyone inside. Entering the Dongxing Hall, they saw the Empress, but didn't spot Princess Jincheng's figure. At this moment, Princess Jincheng stood behind the screen, able to clearly see the scene inside the hall, but the people inside couldn't perceive the presence of the princess. Shizhou looked around, not finding his beloved, feeling somewhat uneasy. He wasn't afraid of those emperors from Yu Kingdom, but he feared for Jincheng being threatened. A faint telepathic message came through. Shizhou received the transmission from Jinchen, and only then did his breath stabilize. At the same time, he silently responded to the transmission, "Don't worry, I won't let you wait." Princess Jinchen didn't want Shizhou to risk it, so she voiced her thoughts. As long as she reached the four tribulation realm, no one could stop her. However, Shizhou was confident. Among the emperors, he feared no one. In the Shi Kingdom, there were a few geniuses who could threaten him, but in the Yu Kingdom, he was invincible. This wasn't arrogance. It was a fact. If it weren't for the sudden appearance of Jian Wushuang, even if they turned the Yu Kingdom upside down, they wouldn't find an emperor who could match Shizhou. Brat, don't say my Yu Kingdom won't tolerate you. If you defeat the geniuses of my Yu Kingdom today, I won't interfere in your matters. The Empress spoke directly. Elder Mukin had already explained everything about Jian Wushuang. At this moment, even the Empress had some confidence. With the Empress's words as solid as a mountain, I am willing to take up the challenge. Shizhou took a step forward, standing in the center of the grand hall, his gaze becoming fierce. Who will go first? He looked at the four people, his aura continuously rising. Just as Jian Wushuang was about to step forward, he was stopped by Wu Li. Let the other three go first. Mukin has already paid up. We can't let them have it so easy. Wu Li transmitted his thoughts. Mukin also shared the same sentiment, wanting these three to test the opponent's strength first. The three were evenly matched in strength, coming here for this purpose, so they didn't hesitate and one of them stepped forward. I'll give it a try. The person was clad in heavy armor. As soon as his words fell, his aura surged. His divine power directly soared to 130,000-fold. He had already reached the pinnacle of the one tribulation realm. Shizhou glanced sideways. The person in front of him was unfamiliar, but the eruption of 130,000-fold divine powers indicated he was not ordinary. He, too, erupted with 130,000-fold divine power. Jian Wushuang stared at the two, sensing that Shizhou hadn't exerted his full strength, while the emperor summoned by Elder Mukin had reached his peak. Moreover, the vitality on this emperor seemed somewhat weak. He should be much older than them. Princess Jincheng and the prodigy named Shizhou were probably born less than 1,000 millennia ago. 1,000 millennia in the ancient moon spacetime was a considerable amount of time, especially for tribulation realm powerhouses. It was akin to a closed-door cultivation period. In such ancient temporal rivers like the ancient moon spacetime, time was measured in epochs. For instance, the era of the divine spirits era during the peak period of the ancient Wood continent. The flame god divine spirit within the Shi Kingdom, at the pinnacle of the Eight Tribulation Realm, was renowned throughout the ancient moon spacetime. Those who could establish an era were generally the masters of the Eight Tribulation Realm. The era of that flame god hadn't passed long ago. The peak of the current era had yet to arrive, giving everyone a chance. Come on! Xianxia stretched out his hand, and with a flick, silver scales appeared on his body. The two lunged at each other, each launching their own attacks. Just in a momentary confrontation, the armored emperor could feel Xianxia's terror. If he had taken that punch head-on, he might have been seriously injured. Yet, he could sense that Xianxia hadn't exerted even a bit more divine power. Clearly, they both had 130,000-fold divine power, so why was there such a vast difference? Jian Wuxia also marveled at this sight. It was his first time witnessing a showdown between the Emperor Prodigy and the genius of the ancient moon spacetime. He discovered a staggering gap. In the same cultivation realm, with equal strength, experience was more crucial. Although Xianxia had elevated his divine power to match his opponents, he could still easily defeat him. Emperor Mongjia attacked once again, pushing his aura to the extreme, relentlessly assaulting with every punch carrying the force of 130,000-fold divine power. He continuously drove Xianxia back, each of his moves finding its mark. With relentless attacks that lasted only moments, Emperor Mongjia's aura began to wane. Xianxia, who had been passively enduring the onslaught, remained unfazed. "It's my turn," Xianxia smirked, darting forward and appearing in front of Emperor Mongjia in an instant. With a swift motion, he raised his foot and delivered a fierce kick to Emperor Mongjia's face. With just one kick, Emperor Mongjia staggered back several steps, his head left unprotected, his divine body displaying visible cracks. He couldn't believe it. Despite employing the same divine power, his relentless assault failed to harm his opponent in the slightest, while he himself was repelled and injured by a single strike. This can't be. He couldn't accept it. Wiping the blood from the corner of his mouth, he once again surged his aura to its peak, forming hand seals and unleashing bursts of divine power, creating immensely powerful energy spheres. Jian Wuxia shook his head lightly at the sight. Relying solely on divine power had its drawbacks, primarily the excessive consumption. Though the strength was formidable, continuing like this might exhaust him before defeating his opponent. Emperor Mongjia's relentless assault did have some effect. Xianxia began to struggle under the onslaught, his divine power showing a slight decline. Yet Emperor Mongjia wasn't faring any better. His divine power had already decreased to 120,000-fold. If it dropped further, his attacks would pose no threat to Xianxia. Enduring countless waves of energy, Xianxia blocked with his arms, taking a half-step back before erupting once more. His entire aura suddenly changed, and he forcefully charged through the energy waves, catching Emperor Mongjia off guard, who was completely engrossed in his attack and hadn't anticipated Xianxia's countercharge. Isn't there a saying that goes something like, "The best defense is a good offense"? Well, it doesn't seem to apply now. In an instant, Xianxia charged right up to his opponent, delivering a direct punch that caved into the chest of Emperor Mongjia. Even Mongjia's formidable armor showed signs of cracking. That was a treasure of the universe. Even a universe treasure showed a hint of damage, not to mention Emperor Mongjia's divine body, which had now been completely shattered. His divine power plummeted from 120,000-fold to less than 50,000-fold. He almost fell into a state of unconsciousness. Originally, Emperor Mongjia had intended to trade injuries, but he hadn't expected to be defeated so easily. The remaining two looked at each other, their confidence instantly shattered. Initially, they had planned for a rotating battle strategy, with the next stepping in if the first failed. This would gradually wear down the opponent's divine power. But now, it seemed that Xianxia's divine power hadn't changed at all. Not even his aura fluctuated, remaining as steady as before. It was as if he had just sipped a cup of tea with ease. Emperor Mongjia struggled to his feet, trembling as he admitted defeat. "I have lost." With that, he stepped aside, while Elder Mukin's expression turned ashen. He never expected Xianxia to be this strong. Even Princess Jincheng's power was only a little over 130,000-fold. Even with extraordinary divine power and some secret techniques, she was only a step above these three. But Shi Zhou's displayed strength surpassed these three emperors by several levels at least. Empress Fengqian, as the strongest present at the Five Tribulations realm, the Universe Master saw through it all. This time they might lose. There was some hesitation in her heart. If they lost, how could they salvage the situation? Shi Zhou flexed his wrist, seemingly dissatisfied with the punch he just threw. He stared at the remaining few individuals and spoke, "How about you all come at me together?" His words were provocative. After all, they were all geniuses. How could they team up? That would be too shameful. Elder Mukin, however, had thick skin. He spoke up directly. "Since that's the case, let's all go together. Young people love pushing their limits." After speaking, he even winked at Jian Wushuang. But Jian Wushuang remained unmoved. Then Elder Mukin turned to Wu Li. Wu Li, however, felt a bit troubled. He privately messaged, "Elder Mukin, my nephew is quite young. You know how young people are, they value their face a lot. But don't worry, no matter how strong the opponent is this time, I have absolute confidence in him." With words spoken thus, Elder Mukin didn't insist further. The remaining two emperors nodded at each other. Money talks. They couldn't care less about their reputation and could only grit their teeth and go at it together. This time, the two of them were fully prepared, and with Elder Mukin's promise, as long as they injured Shi Zhou, it counted as a great achievement. The previously promised treasures could also be increased by 50%. "So, it's just you two left?" Shi Zhou's gaze shifted from the two individuals to Jian Wushuang. Jian Wushuang also looked at him, a hint of a smile crossing his face as he nodded calmly. Electric arcs flickered in Shi Zhou's eyes. He could sense Jian Wushuang's extraordinariness, definitely stronger than the two before him. However, his own strength was not to be underestimated either. Even if Jian Wushuang had hidden cards, he had even stronger ones. He was Shi Xiu's grandson, not only with a powerful bloodline but also not lacking in formidable treasures. Due to his father being an illegitimate child, he had suffered quite a bit since childhood. Later, because of the downfall of his enemies, Shi Xiu felt indebted to his son and compensated everything to this grandson. Shi Zhou didn't disappoint as the most outstanding figure of the Shi family's current generation, and also one of the super strong figures of the rejuvenating Shi kingdom. With a leap, he became one of the most outstanding emperors of the Shi family's current generation. Moreover, he had always retained his strength, always hiding something. This was related to his early experiences. Before his father fell, he had instructed him to always conceal his strongest cards, to only reveal techniques that had never been used before, as those were the true trump cards. Once unleashed, the opponent would perish. That's the only way to always have a trump card. Unfortunately, he had misunderstood. Back then, it wasn't as prosperous as it was now. There was no need for hidden cards while enjoying the cool breeze under a big tree. The more one showcased themselves, the more attention they garnered, and the more treasures they obtained. Shi Zhou, don't be arrogant. Two emperor geniuses made their move together, only to find that Shi Zhou didn't even regard them, which infuriated them even more. They immediately ignited their divine bodies. Elder Mukin had already promised them that all the treasures consumed during the confrontation would be counted on his account. So they fought without hesitation. They didn't spare anything, directly burning 30% of their divine bodies, reaching their limits. Their divine power erupted directly to a 136,000-fold. This was the pinnacle of the one tribulation realm. The peak of the two tribulation realm was around 180,000-fold. The standard divine power of the three tribulation realm was around 200,000-fold. Shi Zhou's hand condensed suddenly, and as he clenched his fist, a purple thunderbolt had already formed in the palm of his hand. His divine power remained unchanged, but the thunderbolt in his palm burst out with over 140,000-fold divine power. What's this? The two emperor's prodigies were greatly astonished, but before they could exchange words, a thunderous explosion erupted before them. Shi Zhou's eyes glimmered with thunder. With just a glance, thunder poured down like a waterfall, engulfing the two of them. Even the Empress couldn't help but be moved by this scene. The force just now seemed to exceed her expectations of the emperors. Could there truly be emperors of such immense power in the world? Mukin's face turned ashen. This was somewhat different from the information he had received. How could the other party be so powerful? The two emperors were enveloped in thunder, unable to escape at all, already trapped to death. How could he be this strong? Neither of them dared to believe it. This thunderous cage had already erupted with a divine power of 150,000-fold, something they couldn't possibly break through. Meanwhile, Shurjiu was casually manipulating the thunderous cage. With just a flick of his hand, he could easily defeat these two. Huff! Jian Wushuang shook his head, unwilling to watch any longer. Instead of wasting time here, he might as well act early. Among those present, except for Wu Li, no one probably had any hope for Jian Wushuang. Even Empress Fengqin felt hopeless. Elder Mukin sighed. Brother Wu Li, this time it's my fault for the misinformation. He had already deemed Jian Wushuang to have no hope at all. Brother Mukin, the situation is uncertain. There may still be a chance, Wu Li said confidently. This made Elder Mukin somewhat doubtful. His gaze towards Jian Wushuang was solemn. How could Wu Li be so confident? Could it be that Jian Wushuang was Wu Li's illegitimate child? The more he looked, the more he felt the resemblance between the two. But since Wu Li had said so, he had no choice but to believe him, directly transmitting his voice to let the two trapped in the thunder prison give up. Those two also felt hopeless, not prepared to persevere much longer. But upon hearing that Mukin still wanted to withhold treasures, they couldn't help but feel somewhat displeased. Lord Mukin, my two brothers still have a move that can definitely seriously injure the other party. But the price is a bit high. After hearing this, Mukin was somewhat incredulous, but still nodded in agreement. He would bear any cost. Being able to seriously injure them was the best outcome. Princess Jincheng behind the screen was thrilled to see this. She hadn't expected Shurjiu's strength to be so formidable, actually being able to easily defeat these three emperors. And these two had even erupted with a 136,000-fold divine power. Though not as strong as her, if they joined forces, she feared it would be difficult to suppress them, let alone defeat them. Thinking of this, she understood somewhat. Perhaps Shurjiu didn't want to harm her, so he had been holding back his strength. She was a very strong-willed person, quite similar to the Empress in this regard. Indeed, Shurjiu had been hiding things from Jincheng for this reason. Of course, what his father had told him was even more important. Surrender. It's meaningless now. Shurjiu controlled the prison with his palm, exerting a slight force, causing the two in the thunder prison to almost kneel. They couldn't bear it at all. TSK, you are indeed powerful. Clearly having the same divine power, and even inferior to the two of us, yet you can unleash such a powerful move. I admit we can't win this time. The two stared at Shurjiu, indeed ready to give up, but they wouldn't let him off so easily. But don't think you'll have it easy either. As soon as the words fell, Shurjiu's pupils contracted, instantly sensing a threat approaching. With a forceful palm, he intended to directly defeat the two. But it was too late. The thunder prison was instantly dissolved by a black mist, and that mass of black fog rushed straight towards him. The Empress stood up directly from her throne the moment the black fog appeared. Her eyes were as deep as a starry sky, staring at the black mist, fear evident in her eyes. She had seen and heard of this black mist before. This was a power not belonging to this era. How could it appear here? Others couldn't discern the special nature of the black mist at all. Even Jian Wushuang, feeling only the force of the black mist consuming, saw nothing particularly unique about it. But when it assaulted Shurjiu after dissolving the thunderous cage, a familiar aura struck Jian Wushuang, causing his expression to darken. The power of death. It was an incredibly potent force of death. Upon touching Shurjiu, it instantly devoured much of his vitality. Shurjiu's divine power plummeted in an instant. Fortunately, the power of death did not belong to the two emperors, weakening continuously. Otherwise, it could have directly strangled Shurjiu. This threat was something Shi Jiao had never experienced before, too terrifying. If an ordinary tribulation realm cultivator encountered such a dense black mist, it would likely leave behind a curse, rendering them unable to recover vitality for their entire life. Fortunately, Shi Jiao was only an emperor. Even so, the black mist dissolved nearly half of his body, leaving only bones. His face was the same, with horrified bones exposed to the outside world. Jin Chun, witnessing this scene, felt extreme heartache, almost rushing out, but was stopped by the Empress. Initially, the Empress was also ready to intervene, but at the thought of Jian Wushuang losing again, she couldn't bring herself to do it. In the end, she held back. "Ha! He indeed can't resist it. Let's strike now." One of the emperors laughed. Seizing the opportunity, the two emperors attacked again. Shi Jiao was now at his weakest, unable to withstand the two of them at all. Even though the strength of the two emperors had weakened considerably, they still overwhelmed him completely. Jian Wushuang couldn't bear to watch anymore. 2 against 1, resorting to such despicable means. Moreover, the appearance of the power of death made him vigilant. On the other hand, Mukin was excited. With the tide of battle turning, Shi Jiao's current vulnerability was akin to a blank sheet of paper. Perhaps he wouldn't even need Jian Wushuang to intervene to win. Judging from the current situation, it seemed to be true. Shi Jiao's divine power had plummeted below 100,000-fold. But Jian Wushuang didn't see it that way. Even though his divine power had decreased, his divine body hadn't shattered at all. The divine power origin source could be instantly restored. Shi Jiao took out a piece of uncut jade from his mustard seed, crushed it, and instantly his missing flesh grew back, and his divine power began to skyrocket as it recovered. Die! There was a murderous intent in Shi Jiao's eyes as he directly went for the kill, his divine power skyrocketing to 150,000-fold, defeating the two opponents with a punch each in an instant. Moreover, a thunderbolt condensed in his palm again. This thunderbolt was not a cage but a sharp blade that pierced through the chests of the two opponents. At this moment, Mukin directly intervened and said, "Leave these two alive. It was just a trial, one couldn't kill." This was a prearranged rule. Upon hearing Mukin's words, not only did Shi Jiao not stop, but he also swung his blade, intending to deal with the two directly. Just now, he had almost died at the hands of these two, and if he hadn't had a trick up his sleeve, they probably would have crippled him even if they hadn't tried to kill him. Seeing that Shi Jiao was still about to attack, Mukin immediately flashed to his side and forcefully separated the three with a surge of powerful divine power. The two emperors were thrown off like dead dogs, falling to the ground, completely unable to move. The Empress calmed her emotions for a moment and conveyed her thoughts to Mukin. These two individuals couldn't be let go. They needed to ascertain the origin of the black mist that had just appeared. Although Mukin was somewhat puzzled, if the Empress said so, it meant the situation was far from simple. He refrained from asking further questions. On the other hand, Shi Jiao was somewhat annoyed. The formidable Tribulation Realm expert beside him also opened his eyes at this moment. He didn't look at Mukin but rather at the Empress of Yu Kingdom. Though he didn't speak, a cold snort from him shook the hall. "Elder Shirhan, indeed, I was rude just now." The Empress nodded slightly, expressing her apology. This Elder Shirhan was a prominent figure from the Shi Kingdom in the previous era. Back then, he possessed the strength of a peak Tribulation Realm expert. Unfortunately, he failed to overcome the tribulation and now, having become a scattered Tribulation Realm expert, his strength was inferior to that of a typical Tribulation Realm expert. Even so, he would have acted just now if not for Shi Jiao's intervention. If he had acted, the Empress would have surely taken the opportunity to drive him away. For the sake of Mukin, he had endured much. "Your Majesty Fengqian, don't forget. He is the grandson of the Fifth Lord. He carries the blood of our Shi family." Shirhan's voice was loud, not merely waving a big flag. In the current ancient Wood continent, the Shi family held significant influence. Moreover, the Shi Kingdom even possessed a flame god that could suppress the existence of the divine Wood King. A small country like Yu Kingdom dared to treat descendants of the Shi family in such a manner. If it weren't for Shi Zhou's infatuation, he would have eagerly exposed this matter, letting the Yu Kingdom know how terrifying the anger of the Shi Kingdom could be. Senior Shirhan, please stop talking. I, Shi Zhou, came here with determination. Gasping for breath, Shi Zhou, first injured by the power of death and then internally shaken by Mukin, was somewhat unstable in his divine body. His strength had declined quite a bit now, but it didn't have much of an impact. Now only Jian Wushuang remained. As long as he defeated Jian Wushuang, he could rightfully marry Jinchen or marry into the Yu Kingdom, and he was willing to do so. As long as his grandfather supported him, it was enough. Princess Jinchen behind the screen watched this scene with heartache. The Empress's face showed some embarrassment at the words. Had she ever been threatened like this before? The anger of the Shi family? The Empress also had anger in her eyes. If she were in the Seven Tribulation realm, what would she fear from the Shi Kingdom? What would she fear from others entering the Yu Kingdom? Unfortunately, she wasn't, so she had to fight. In this sacred assembly, she must secure the position of the Holy Maiden. Then she would abdicate the throne of the Yu Kingdom, go to the ancient Wu sect with endless resources, and have no worries about the Sixth Tribulation. After becoming a Sixth Tribulation realm expert, she would wholeheartedly prepare for the Seventh Tribulation. With the support of the ancient Wu sect, she also had great confidence. If she continued to advance, even with the combined strength of her entire clan, she wouldn't have the confidence to reach the Seven Tribulation realm. The Sixth Tribulation realm was already her limit. Moreover, it was unstable. Otherwise, she would have already crossed the Sixth Tribulation. Mukin paid no attention to the foolish Shirhan and instead turned to Jian Wushuang, saying, "It's all up to you. Don't feel pressured. Shi Zhou is already injured, so you still have a good chance." Jian Wushuang nodded lightly and took a step forward, already in front of Shi Zhou. When the Empress looked at Jian Wushuang, she couldn't quite see through him. Deep down, however, she hoped Jian Wushuang could defeat his opponent. Princess Jincheng behind the screen also kept her eyes on Jian Wushuang. She always felt that Jian Wushuang resembled the mysterious strongman she had encountered on Hundred Flowers Mountain, and she was deeply worried. "You're very strong." Jian Wushuang faced Shi Zhou. No one expected that the first thing Jian Wushuang said would be to praise Shi Zhou. Shi Zhou smiled and said casually, "Although I can't see through you, I can feel that you're different from the three before you." "It's true, I am somewhat different," Jian Wushuang admitted directly, without any concealment. After saying that, to everyone's surprise, he took out a life-restoring fruit brought from the Qishan temple from his mustard seed bag. This was a treasure for enhancing divine bodies and also for restoring them. In a realm dominated by divine power, it was most suitable for cultivators. Swish! Jian Wushuang threw it without any hesitation. Shi Zhou was momentarily stunned but still caught it. Not only Shi Zhou, but the others also couldn't understand what Jian Wushuang was doing. Emperor Mongjia, who had been easily defeated by Shi Zhou earlier, was even more astonished and asked, "What is he trying to do?" The Empress's eyes kept flashing, unable to understand Jian Wushuang's intentions. "Wu Li, what's going on here? Could it be that the fruit is highly toxic?" Mukin speculated privately through voice transmission. However, Wu Li just rolled his eyes, finding the prince embarrassing. He directly said, "Nothing much. Perhaps my nephew feels it's too shameful to defeat an injured emperor." Mukin was completely stunned. Isn't this too confident? Shi Zhou's previous burst of divine power had already exceeded 150,000-fold, and that was when he was injured. Perhaps he's even more powerful than this, and there might be a hidden move. Isn't he afraid of losing? At this moment, he couldn't care less and directly reminded Jian Wushuang. "Nephew Wushuang, you must think it through. Whoever marries Jincheng will secure a spot in the sacred assembly." Brother Mukin. Saying such things takes the fun out of it. Standing on the sidelines, Shirhan sneered at the two, but he couldn't help but look at Jian Wushuang differently for his actions. Compared to the previous few, Jian Wushuang was clearly more pleasing to the eye. This fool wasted the trump card he just used. The two emperors who were nearly killed by Shurjiu looked at Jian Wushuang as if he were an idiot. Shurjiu held the green fruit in his hand, using thought power to examine it and found nothing wrong. He sincerely said, "Thank you." Crack. He took a bite, and green juice flowed out from the corner of his mouth. Powerful vitality and boundless divine power surged into Shurjiu's body in an instant. In just a moment, he returned to his peak state, even stronger than before. Shurjiu clenched his fists slightly, exerting force, and his divine power erupted directly, accompanied by thunderous strength surging around him. 150,000-fold divine power. "How are you feeling? Have you recovered?" Jian Wushuang inquired. Shurjiu immediately took out 100,000 universe crystals from his mustard seed and thanked him, saying, "Please accept this, my friend. It would be a waste for me to keep such precious treasures." He actually had recovery treasures of his own, but their effects were definitely not as potent as the life-restoring fruit. "Just a fruit. It's nothing worth mentioning." Jian Wushuang shook his head with a smile. However, since the other party insisted, he accepted it. To avoid any awkwardness later on, if the other party felt hesitant to go all out against him. Elder Mukin couldn't hold back anymore. At this point, he even doubted whether Jian Wushuang had been bribed. Just as he was about to speak up, he was pulled back by Wu Li. As a citizen of Yu Kingdom, though not of the royal family, Wu Li felt that if Mukin continued, the dignity of Yu Kingdom would be compromised. Although the Empress was somewhat puzzled, she still greatly appreciated Jian Wushuang's actions. A dispute among gentlemen should be conducted with integrity and honor. If Jian Wushuang truly won, it would be like finding a treasure for her, a member of the Yu royal family. Securing a spot in the sacred assembly could attract such talent. This deal was definitely not a loss. Moreover, it would represent not just Yu, but also the Yu royal family. This was a chance for them to save face. Behind the screen, the crown princess clenched her fists, feeling ecstatic. She was filled with confidence in Shurjiu now. "Let's begin then. Bring it on." Both of them surged with energy simultaneously. Jian Wushuang unleashed the power of the beast god, instantly boosting himself to 130,000-fold. But that wasn't enough. To ensure victory, he directly doubled the power of the beast god. At this moment, his divine power reached a terrifying 160,000-fold. This was already at the top level among the two tribulation realm. Shurjiu's eyes flickered. He anticipated Jian Wushuang's strength, but he didn't expect him to unleash 160,000-fold divine power right from the start. Even though he was proficient in controlling divine power and could easily defeat opponents with the same divine power, Jian Wushuang was no slouch either. Mukin's eyes sparkled even more. Holding Wu Li's arm, he exclaimed excitedly, "Brother Wu Li, we're family now, and yet you still hid this from me." Nephew Wushuang can actually unleash 160,000-fold divine power. Jian Wushuang's strength excited him more than anyone else. Now, Jian Wushuang was even stronger than Shurjiu, surpassing him by more than 10,000-fold divine power. That was a considerable difference. The three emperors who had been defeated earlier were even more astonished. Wasn't it agreed that their strengths were more or less equal? And they also knew that within the Yu Kingdom, there was no emperor prodigy. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been approached. How could a super genius with a divine power of 160,000-fold suddenly emerge? With such a genius around, why bother seeking them out? It's a blatant insult to them. Absolutely humiliating. Shurhan couldn't help but feel shocked when he saw Jian Wushuang erupting with 160,000-fold divine power. 160,000-fold divine power. This was already comparable to the best batch of geniuses from the Shur Kingdom. But he had confidence in Shurjiu. 160,000-fold wasn't that much. Among peers, Shurjiu's mastery of divine power was the most formidable emperor he had ever seen. Experts see the doorway, amateurs see the spectacle. Although Jin Sichin was also a super genius among the emperors, his divine power at its peak could only reach around 140,000-fold. Seeing Jian Wushuang's 160,000-fold divine power, he couldn't help but feel a bit worried. As a party involved, Joe naturally couldn't afford to be careless. A difference of 10,000-fold was like a chasm, so he needed to unleash his trump card once again. Ha! Joe roared angrily, erupting once more. His divine power soared from 150,000-fold to 160,000-fold, and countless electric arcs surrounded him. Jian Wushuang's eyes flickered, feeling a sharp pain. It was much stronger than he had anticipated. With the same divine power, he didn't have much confidence. After all, the opponent specialized in divine power. Although he practiced dual cultivation, he didn't have much confidence in dealing with such a super genius specializing in divine power in his current state. Whoosh! Jian Wushuang took the initiative, utilizing the intricacies of space. In terms of speed, he could suppress Joe. In terms of combat experience, he was not weaker than his opponent. Joe could clearly feel the eerie speed of Jian Wushuang. He was extra cautious when making his move, shifting his position before daring to pause. But Jian Wushuang's speed was more than just that. As soon as Joe stabilized his figure, Jian Wushuang had been waiting in that position, gathering energy with one hand, his divine power erupting. A dark red light wave at close range directly hit Joe from behind. Feeling the threat, Joe attempted to leap to evade. But Jian Wushuang followed closely, his speed far surpassing Joe's, appearing directly above Joe's head and unleashing a punch, forcefully smashing the airborne Joe down again, just as it collided with the light wave. Boom! Jian Wushuang didn't give his opponent any chance. Regardless of who he faced, he disliked dragging things out. With his hands crossed, his divine power erupted once again. Then suddenly lifting his hands, all the divine power on his body exploded. From his core position, an endless vortex of formidable divine power emanated. The Empress persisted, pointing her finger and directly setting up another barrier to withstand the terrifying impact. Otherwise, this hall would have collapsed. Rumbling, after the final burst of the divine power vortex, only countless dust remained. Jian Wushuang could sense that the aura below was weakening. Phew! Joe's figure emerged from the dust. The others in the hall were all terrified, except for Wu Li, who found it all incredible. Originally, reaching 130,000-fold seemed like the pinnacle. Unexpectedly, today he encountered two super geniuses with a divine power of 160,000-fold, and their battle was so intense and fierce. In terms of combat experience, the techniques of these two individuals were no less than those of the Universe Masters. Joe emerged from the dust, his silver battle armor no longer shining brightly, and his hair somewhat disheveled. But his aura kept rising continuously. For how many years? You're the first to directly overpower me. Joe's voice trembled slightly, but his aura kept breaking through. Soon, it soared back to 160,000-fold divine power, and it didn't stop there. 165,000-fold, 168,000-fold, 169,000-fold, 170,000-fold. Jian Wushuang furrowed his brows slightly and said, "Your divine power should be around 180,000-fold. He could sense that Joe was still holding back. TSK, aren't you holding back as well? Joe smirked, not bursting forth the next moment, but instead striking instantly. This time, Joe's speed had increased significantly. Before Jian Wushuang could evade, a punch directly hit his face like a thunderbolt. As Jian Wushuang staggered back, Joe rushed forward again, grabbing his ankle. Exerting all his strength, Joe flung Jian Wushuang away. Immediately after, Joe charged forward again, delivering elbow strikes from top to bottom, causing blood to surge from Jian Wushuang's mouth. "Spirit!" Joe shouted, gathering an immensely powerful divine energy wave in his hands. "Element!" The second word caused the divine power contained within the energy wave to rise to another level. The pure divine power within that wave had already gathered to 180,000-fold. Slash! The final word uttered, and the divine power gathered in Joe's hands erupted completely. A divine power of 190,000 0-00 condensed into a mass, rushed toward Jian Wushuang, who lost his balance. By the time he sensed the immense threat, it was too late. Before he could stabilize his figure, the massive light wave was already upon him. Jian Wushuang tried to block with his hands, but with only 160,000-fold divine power, it was like an insect trying to stop a speeding carriage. The power of the beast god tripled. Jian Wushuang instantly supercharged, his divine power soaring to 190,000-fold, equivalent to the divine power of spirit element / Finally, leaning against the boundary, he managed to block it. But if that massive divine power were to explode completely, he would definitely be injured. The two sides left almost no room for maneuver, erupting directly to their peak. However, it was evident that Shurjio's secret technique could reach up to 190,000-fold divine power, but his own divine power couldn't reach that high, only maintaining around 170,000-fold. Jian Wushuang, on the other hand, was different. Now, facing Shurjio's peak secret technique head-on, his own divine power surged to 190,000-fold. This was truly a solid 190,000-fold divine power. He already had the strength of the three tribulation realm. An emperor with such strength, there were only a few in the entire ancient Wood continent. Even the reigning empress couldn't help but be amazed. 190,000-fold divine power. She hadn't expected Shurjio to be this powerful, let alone Jian Wushuang. It seemed that no matter how strong Shurjio was, Jian Wushuang could still steadily suppress him. This kind of pressure made Shurjio almost breathless for a moment. The strongest secret technique was blocked. This is impossible. Shurjio couldn't accept it. 190,000-fold divine power. Yet he still couldn't defeat Jian Wushuang. Buzz. Jian Wushuang pushed back against the scorching energy waves with both hands, trying to counterattack. He didn't have as much astonishment and hesitation now. Shurjio's strength did indeed exceed his imagination. The energy waves of 190,000-fold divine power were too outrageous for his secret technique. Unfortunately, he had not yet obtained the true core secret technique, otherwise, he wouldn't be in such a sorry state. Clearly much stronger in divine power than Shurjio, yet in terms of controlling that power, he was inferior. Another 20,000-fold divine power erupted based on his divine body. With a 170,000-fold divine power, he was actually not at a disadvantage against Shurjio's 190,000-fold divine power. Right now, Jian Wushuang was even on the defensive himself. Ah! Jian Wushuang exerted all his strength. The beast god weapon was running wildly, and the origin source was compressed to its lowest level. His divine power had reached close to 200,000-fold. Go back! Jian Wushuang roared angrily, enduring the scorching sensation coming from his hands, forcibly pushing back the spirit element / With such immense divine power, even the barrier was trembling. The Empress had to elevate the power of the barrier once again. Mukin and the others quickly retreated. The battle between the two emperors was already threatening to them, especially seeing Jian Wushuang's divine power approaching 200,000-fold. Their eyes were almost bulging in shock. Although the strong man from the Shi family was amazed at Jian Wushuang's strength, he was more worried about Shurjio at this moment. If the spirit element / was pushed back, how could Shurjio withstand it? Your Majesty, we concede. Seeing that Shurjio was still preparing to resist, Shurhan couldn't stand it anymore and directly chose to concede on behalf of Shurjio. If this continued, Shurjio would undoubtedly die. Even if he could withstand this backlash, he would still not be Jian Wushuang's opponent. The gap was too great. If it weren't for the constraint of the barrier, Jian Wushuang could easily evade this move, and his agility would also be impressive. No matter how Shurjio calculated it, there was no hope of winning. No! Shurjio was still unwilling, his hands frantically unsealing, and the purple thunder at his brow flashed wildly. The power of prohibition. The Empress had just intended to suppress that arrogance, but she saw Shurjio's determination, and his aura was still rising continuously. She understood that Shurjio still had cards up his sleeve. so she maintained the barrier again and did not intervene. Shirhan felt that it was too reckless, completely unnecessary. If it wasn't working, they could have Xiao come forward personally for the marriage proposal, or even abduct the Grand Princess. There was no need to make it like this. It's too crazy. How could this possibly be the power of an emperor? Mukin's hands trembled. The three emperors who were defeated earlier had retreated to the corner. Their eyes were lifeless, obviously quite shaken. 130,000-fold divine power was merely the pinnacle of the one tribulation realm. But now, the two figures on the field could unleash the power of the three tribulation realms, and they still had hidden cards. Even Wu Li, despite his confidence in Jian Wushuang, felt somewhat uneasy at this moment. It was fortunate that he had chosen Jian Wushuang. If it were someone else, he would have despaired long ago. We must win, Wu Li prayed in his heart. He had witnessed Jian Wushuang's true strength. Jian Wushuang had yet to draw his sword, nor had he unleashed the eternal ancient transformation. Once he used the power of the starry sky, it wouldn't be calculated by divine power anymore. At present, Jian Wushuang was only at the peak under normal circumstances. Realizing that Shirjiu still had a trick up his sleeve, Jian Wushuang was also intimidated by the opponent's strength this time. The ancient moon spacetime, the strongest emperor, wasn't that high priest? Judging from Wu Li's tone, the other party could suppress a universe master. Mastering the universe at the tribulation realm is vastly different from not mastering it. For example, the ordinary power of the three tribulation realms ranged from 180,000-fold to 220,000-fold. But if one mastered the universe, divine power could explode to the peak of 300,000-fold. Wu Li, at the half-step 4 tribulation realm, had 300,000-fold divine power. There was a gap of over 100,000-fold divine power. The gap with the 2 tribulation realm was even greater. So even the most extraordinary emperor would typically only reach the threshold of the 3 tribulation realm. Those capable of rivaling the universe masters, even suppressing them, are legends of their era. But now, the aura erupting from Shirjiu's body has reached the same level as Jian Wushuang. He once again thrusts the spirit element slash towards Jian Wushuang. This time, the divine power within the spirit element slash explodes to 200,000-fold. Jian Wushuang's face turns deathly pale, but he can only grit his teeth and endure. This time he was indeed careless. If he had known earlier, he would have broken through 100,000-fold divine power and first integrated the bones of Dongjun. In this way, the peak of the beast god's power would not be merely tripled but could reach an astonishing 5-fold. Then, his normal combat power would rival that of the universe masters. With his current strength, quickly resolving the battle seems somewhat unlikely. The prohibition at the center of Shirjiu's brow opens wide, and the divine power within him surges up all at once, now surpassing Jian Wushuang, reaching 200,000-fold. At his brow, there is a universe treasure refined for him by his grandfather. A universe treasure at the peak of the 6th tribulation realm. It contains the divine power of the half-step 7 tribulation realm powerhouse. Once unleashed, its potential is boundless. It increases with the strength of the opponent. This kind of heaven-defying treasure is already comparable to Jian Wushuang's beast god weapon. According to Jian Wushuang's speculation, the beast god weapon was refined during the peak period of the Qixin Temple and should be a universe treasure of the 7 tribulation realm. But now, although its internal origin source has been repaired, it has not yet returned to its peak state. If it reaches its true peak, it will be even stronger than it is now. Break! Shirjiu clenches both hands suddenly, and the aura within the spirit element slash bursts completely. At this moment, the prohibition power within Shirjiu's body also reaches its peak. Just the protective shield condensed externally possesses 200,000-fold divine power. In the divine spirit Tao arena of the Shir Kingdom, the half-step 7 tribulation realm powerhouse, Shirxiu, sits on a mountain peak, contemplating the Tao of the flame god. But at this moment, he suddenly opens his eyes. According to his bloodline and the resonance of the treasure he personally refined, he senses that his very talented grandson has fallen into some kind of danger. Through the temporal rift, he could see the kingdom of Yu. You kingdom, emperor. As he reached the end, astonishment flickered in Xianxia's eyes. He had thought his grandson had encountered a formidable tribulation realm, necessitating the opening of the prohibition. But he hadn't expected that the opponent his grandson had faced would also be an emperor. He couldn't help but exclaim, "It seems that this sacred assembly is truly unprecedented." The sacred assembly of the ancient Wu sect, although meant for selecting a holy maiden, also recruited some core disciples during the selection process. That's why the spots were so precious. Becoming a core disciple of the ancient Wu sect wasn't easy. Even someone like Xianxia, a direct descendant of the seven tribulation realm, needed to go through rigorous selection to become a core disciple of the ancient Wu sect. But even so, how many could reach the five tribulation realm? Only the holy maiden could achieve that. The remaining core disciples, despite being cultivated by the ancient Wu sect, mostly stopped at the 3 or 4 tribulation realm, like his grandson or the emperor who fought against his grandson. Such an extraordinary emperor would find it effortless to enter the ancient Wu sect. He might even become a candidate disciple of the ancient Moon Divine sect. They were among the few prodigies in the Shi kingdom. Xianxia also thought of the divine archer, who had risen within a mere 10,000 years. Fan Tianfeng, with the same 200,000-fold divine power, possessing unfathomable strength. Coupled with some extraordinary emperors from the ancient Wu sect, this sacred assembly is indeed quite intriguing. Sensing Xianxia's arrival in Yu Kingdom, Xianxia promptly communicated with an ancient powerhouse within the royal family of Yu, a scattered tribulation powerhouse of the 6th tribulation realm. Once an imperial emperor of a certain era in Yu Kingdom, he had led Yu Kingdom to its peak. Among the 16 kingdoms, there are rankings. Currently, Yu Kingdom ranks at the bottom, but in the era of that ancestor, it was among the top 5. He was also a half-step 7 tribulation existence, unfortunately failing in his tribulation crossing, becoming a scattered tribulation. Xianxia, why do you summon me? A venerable voice echoed through space-time, reaching inside the kingdom of Shi. Xianxia calmly replied, I have a junior with me. In your Yu Kingdom's imperial palace, I hope you, elder brother, spare his life. Tiestes, such a young and tender little fellow. Two mighty beings exchanged words with a gap between them. Xianxia lowered his posture to speak, naturally giving face to the ancient powerhouse from Yu Kingdom. He was a scattered tribulation descending from the mountains, while Xianxia was the universe master ascending the mountains. Within the Yu Kingdom's imperial palace, Empress Fengqian received a transmission from an ancestor within the royal family, her expression unchanged. Naturally, she had discretion. In today's Yu Kingdom, she still called the shots. Even though there were several ancestors within the royal family, she was ultimately the one in power, and those ancestors would all give her face. If it was truly necessary to kill someone like Xianxia to boost Yu's strength, no one would hesitate. But it wasn't necessary. It was best to make Xianxia retreat willingly. The current empress found Jian Wuxuang more and more pleasing to the eye. Not only was his strength extraordinary, but his background also suited her taste. As a descendant of the Wu family, he had the support of the Wu family behind him. In the future, the Wu family would also stand together with the royal family of Yu. Could be considered mutually beneficial. Crack. The barrier began to show cracks. The spirit element slash was completely shattered. Countless divine powers surrounded Jian Wuxuang, as if swallowing his figure whole. Not only did this cause Jian Wuxuang to break out in a cold sweat, but it also made everyone else tense. Of course, except for Princess Jincheng. Even Shirhan and Xianxia didn't want Jian Wuxuang to fall like this. Powerful individuals always sympathize with each other. Moreover, Jian Wuxuang had previously given him the treasure to restore his divine power for a fair fight. Even though he returned the universe crystals, with this gentlemanly gesture, it still earned him admiration. Surrounded by countless divine power, Jian Wuxuang's back was enveloped by the candle dragon feather wings, and despite the violent divine power assault, it couldn't break through. The defense of the beast god armor was impeccable. It weakened 99% of the divine power attacks. Those that landed on Jian Wuxuang at most could only shatter his divine body. It didn't count as serious injuries. As long as it was a conventional injury, he could instantly recover. After the raging divine power persisted for the time it takes to burn an incense stick, it completely disappeared. Shizhou floated in the air, his clothes tattered, and his silver battle armor slightly damaged, looking at the figure of the beast god in the center of the divine power. Whoosh! Jian Wushuang unfurled his candle dragon feather wings. Indeed, his divine body had ruptured. But in the next moment, his divine body instantly recovered. His aura erupted once again, reaching 190,000-fold. Your secret technique is formidable. Jian Wushuang couldn't help but exclaim. However, Shizhou widened his eyes in astonishment and said, "You didn't suffer any injuries at all?" Not only Shizhou, but everyone watching the battle also felt incredulous. Even Wu Li, this time, furrowed his brows. The more he understood Jian Wushuang, the more he felt that something was not quite right. Jian Wushuang's strength seemed to exceed his expectations. This time, he miraculously recovered from serious injuries at an astonishing speed. Unfortunately, just like that, you can't threaten me at all. Jian Wushuang flashed his figure and instantly rushed out. In just an instant, he had already arrived in front of Shizhou. With a clenched fist, he directly struck the opponent's chest, followed by a series of melee attacks. Facing the frenzied assault, Shizhou quickly stabilized. Employing the power of restrictions, although he gained a brief boost, time was limited. He was more anxious than Jian Wushuang. Spirit Element Slash. Shizhou took a half-step back, once again unleashing his peak secret technique. The same move again? It's getting boring. Jian Wushuang dodged aside, gathering a massive sword blade in his hands, which descended from the sky, aiming straight for Shizhou's face. Before the hand seal could even form, Shizhou had to retreat to avoid it. Jian Wushuang didn't give him any chance at all. After disrupting his opponent's secret technique, he lunged forward again. Shizhou hurriedly defended himself. Now he was left with only one last move. Dragging it out any longer would undoubtedly result in his defeat. But using that move would entail a huge consumption of energy. He might even end up falling into a deep slumber. Buzz! Shizhou erupted with divine power once more, directly boosting his power to 200,000-fold. He didn't dare to use that move lightly, so he had to fully unleash his restrictions. He erupted with 200,000-fold divine power to counter Jian Wushuang. Feeling the continuous surge of divine power, Jian Wushuang's expression turned cold. He thought he could wear down Shizhou, but he didn't expect his opponent to be so resilient. Now it had been 15 minutes, with no sign of weakening, but rather, Shizhou was getting stronger with each battle, now even reaching 200,000-fold divine power. At this rate, he was at a disadvantage. Beast God Domain! Jian Wushuang shouted with equal fervor. In his normal state, he had reached his peak, with a power of 198,000-fold. Boom! Jian Wushuang gathered qi in both hands, unleashing countless violent qi waves, directly charging towards Shizhou. The qi waves surrounded them, relentlessly attacking. Shizhou allowed Jian Wushuang's attacks to come, bearing them all. Facing countless waves of energy, he surged upward. A fist pounded against Jian Wushuang. At that moment, he had completely gained the upper hand. Jian Wushuang was no match at all at this point. Under the relentless onslaught, Jian Wushuang completely abandoned defense. The intense battle made the spectators gasp in shock. They could see that Jian Wushuang's divine power was starting to decline, while Shizhou's divine power was continuously rising. "What's going on?" Mukin exclaimed. "Wasn't it Shizhou who activated the prohibition?" Not only him, even Wu Li was very puzzled. Clearly, it was Shizhou who exerted the power of the prohibition. For such a long time, Shizhou hadn't weakened due to backlash, but instead Jian Wushuang's divine power had been continuously decreasing. Now Jian Wushuang's rate of recovery couldn't keep up with the consumed divine power. Shi Han's eyes gleamed with excitement. He exclaimed, "The peak treasure personally refined by Fifth Lord. How could it be so simple? Jian Wushuang is going to lose." The three emperors who had been defeated earlier now showed a slight recovery, staring at the two figures on the battlefield, shaking their heads in sighs. Originally, they thought Jian Wushuang had won for sure, but they didn't expect Shi Jiao to turn the tables. But now, whoever wins between the two within the barrier, they can accept it, because their strengths have exceeded their expectations. Even though everyone has heard of the Grand High Priest, but they have never witnessed this before. This time, they have witnessed from start to finish two super emperors fighting desperately. The divine power had surged from an initial 130,000-fold to a staggering 200,000-fold. Is he going to lose? Empress Fengqian also didn't favor Jian Wushuang anymore. She originally thought Jian Wushuang could definitely win, but now Shi Jiao was getting stronger and stronger, completely unaffected by the prohibition's backlash. Jian Wushuang, on the other hand, was getting weaker and weaker with hardly any chance left. Unless there's a trump card. The eldest Princess Jinqin behind the screen was the most excited. Clap. She directly tore through the screen and rushed out. Standing at the edge of the barrier, she looked excitedly at Shi Jiao. This scene, no matter who it was, would be deeply moved. Her beloved risking his life for her. For the sake of marrying her, Shi Jiao had sacrificed a lot. Seeing this scene, the Empress remembered the past. The hindrance ceased to exist. Because once Jian Wushuang lost, she wouldn't have any excuses. It was her own commitment initially impossible to retract. If she did, it was feared that Shi Jiao would personally intervene. At that point, being in the wrong would lead to losing the upper hand. Bang! A muffled sound echoed as Jian Wushuang's left arm shattered completely. That was the arm integrated with the candle dragons, and it was forcibly broken by Shi Jiao. Blood gushed continuously from the wound. Jian Wushuang's divine power plummeted by about 10,000-fold. Now, his divine power was only around 160,000-fold. With one hand holding the arm just torn from Jian Wushuang's body, Shi Jiao didn't seize the opportunity to attack again. Instead, he stood still, staring at Jian Wushuang and said, "You've lost. If we continue, it will come to life and death." Hee. Jian Wushuang supported his wound with one hand, emitting a sinister chuckle. This was the first time someone had pitted him. Admit defeat? He had never even considered surrendering to someone of the same level. It's time to end this. Jian Wushuang forced a bitter smile. Originally, he wanted to drag it out and see, but he found he couldn't outlast the opponent at all. So, there was no need to persist. Your strength is formidable, your foundation must be much stronger than mine. If it weren't for the treasures my grandfather gave me, I would have lost long ago. Shi Jiao tried to console Jian Wushuang, but Jian Wushuang straightened up, a surge of vitality transmitted, instantly regenerating his lost arm. However, his divine power didn't increase. There was no longer any necessity. Even if he restored it to 190,000-fold, it would be meaningless. After moving his arm slightly, Jian Wushuang breathed a sigh of relief, feeling relaxed. You're wrong about that. In fact, my divine power is nowhere near yours. Jian Wushuang shook his head. He originally thought he was on par with the opponent in controlling divine power. Now it seemed he had guessed wrong. There was indeed a gap. After all, the other party had been cultivating divine power since childhood. How could he possibly surpass the other? This place was the ancient moon spacetime, a supertemporal river much more powerful than the Moro spacetime of the past. The Qixin Temple was nothing impressive here. What he had witnessed was nothing more than an inheritance left behind by a half-step tribulation realm expert. In the ancient moon spacetime, even the 9 tribulation realm had appeared. How could it be comparable to the Qixin Temple? In this spacetime, it wouldn't be surprising even if an emperor stronger than Jian Wushuang appeared. For the thousands of years he had descended, Jian Wushuang was actually quite disappointed with the ancient moon spacetime. It wasn't until today that he felt a hint of joy. A sense of battle intent also arose in his heart. In just one ancient wood continent, there emerged a super emperor like Shi Jiao. And it's likely that the opponent's strength wasn't even the strongest among the emperors in the ancient wood continent. There were even stronger geniuses in the Shi kingdom. The core disciples of the emperors in the ancient Wood sect were also formidable. And this was just the ancient Wood continent. He hadn't even traversed the 9 heavens and 10 earths yet. Countless emperor geniuses shouldn't just be heard of. That would be inaccurate. Just like Shi Jiao in front of him, initially everyone thought his strength was only 130,000-fold. Now it had surged to 200,000-fold. That high priest who had lived through several eras probably had even deeper reserves. It's possible that even he wasn't a match. As long as they hadn't fought before, one couldn't be certain the other was weaker. At first, Jian Wushuang thought he might be the first. Now he didn't have that confidence anymore. But he had the confidence to strive for the position of the first. Outside the barrier, seeing Jian Wushuang's aura sink, the expressions of the crowd changed. Although there was still a glimmer of hope in their hearts, seeing Jian Wushuang about to give up, they couldn't help but sigh deeply. Wu Li's expression also turned serious, inwardly lamenting, "Brother Wushuang, it's time to bring out your true strength. It's over. Even nephew Wushuang is giving up. It's already very good. With such strength, you guys from Yu Kingdom can definitely be absorbed into the core. Your future achievements won't be weaker than those top talents from Shi Kingdom." Shi Han's expression remained indifferent because Shi Jiao was about to defeat Jian Wushuang soon, making him naturally relaxed. Moreover, he had a plan in mind. If Yu Kingdom didn't absorb Jian Wushuang into its core, then he would personally guide Jian Wushuang to Shi Kingdom, get him to enter the core of the royal family. In the Shi Kingdom royal family, it wasn't only the Shi family. There were also elders from other families. As long as they were core figures, they enjoyed the same treatment as the strong of the Shi clan. They could also participate in the sacred assembly. This sacred assembly was extraordinary, and the number of spots would increase. In a divine-level country like Shi Kingdom, how could it be the same as Yu Kingdom with only 20 spots? By then, they could easily secure a spot for Jian Wushuang. Inside the barrier, Jian Wushuang never expected that after scheming with Wu Li like this, they still hadn't secured a spot until today. In the Shi Kingdom, things didn't seem to hold much value. If Jian Wushuang had known, he might have felt utterly betrayed. It all seemed unnecessarily complicated. At this point, he was struggling to make sense of it all. Shi Jiao, pay attention. The Immortal Emperor possesses more than just divine power. Jian Wushuang's expression turned serious. As he spoke, his aura shifted drastically, becoming incredibly restrained. Shi Jiao furrowed his brow, suddenly unable to sense Jian Wushuang's presence. A faint blue aura replaced the previous dark red power of the beast god in an instant. This aura was eternal. It lingered within the starry sky, visible to all, yet wielded by none. Because no one had ever noticed such a force. The power of the starry sky. Jian Wushuang's eyes turned a pale blue. Clasping his fists, he shouted. And even his hair turned blue, surrounded by arcs of pale blue lightning. Eternal ancient transformation. In an instant, Jian Wushuang transformed from the Emperor of Divine Power to the Emperor of Spacetime. The power of time, shrouded in mystery. Within the confines of the barrier, all of time and space fell under Jian Wushuang's control. His transformation seemed devoid of any outward manifestation of power. Yet, the sheer strength he exuded spoke volumes. It was imperceptible. Even the Empress couldn't gauge Jian Wushuang's true strength. She only sensed the disappearance of his divine power, replaced by a mysterious force. Space-time. The Empress's expression changed, marveling. Related to the universe origin source, Wu Li and Mukin were both universe masters, each with their own universe, and naturally recognized the connection between Jian Wushuang's power and the universe origin source. Haha! Turning the tables. I knew he had more up his sleeve, Wu Li exclaimed excitedly. Watch! Shi Jiao is doomed to lose. This time, Mukin didn't dare to be certain, merely asking out of curiosity. Wushuang is just an emperor. How could his aura resemble that of the universe origin source? Let's not dwell on this. Who doesn't have secrets? How else could one be so powerful? Mukin realized he had asked too much and decided not to press further. He hoped Jian Wushuang could defeat Shizhou. Although others noticed Jian Wushuang's divine power fading, they didn't discern much from it. Not even Shizhou himself could perceive anything peculiar. "Is this what you call power?" Shizhou asked uncertainly. "Your divine power seems unchanged." Jian Wushuang didn't deny it, simply stating, "Divine power isn't the only thing. Then let me experience the power beyond divine power." Shizhou's confidence soared, brimming with combativeness. Even the crown princess, standing outside the barrier, showed a look of surprise. She had seen this faint blue aura before. It was at 100 Flowers Mountain. The power emitted by that mysterious 5 Tribulation Realm expert. The more she looked, the more it seemed like it. But that mysterious expert practiced the Tao of the sword. Yet, there was no trace of sword intent on Jian Wushuang. The Tao of the sword and the extreme Tao were distinct yet had a mutually merging state. Jian Wushuang's power was the power of the starry sky. And the Tao of the sword seemed more like a realm he cultivated with the power of the starry sky. However, facing Shizhou, he didn't need to resort to the Tao of the sword at all. The power to kill was too heavy. Perhaps using the sword Tao could instantly eliminate the opponent. Just the eternal ancient transformation was enough. In the peak state, Jian Wushuang's strength, converted into divine power, he didn't know how strong it was. But facing the 3 Tribulation Realm Universe Master, he had enough confidence. That alone explained everything. Shizhou. Before the voice arrived, Jian Wushuang had already crossed his arms and appeared behind Shizhou. The scene stunned everyone. Even Elder Mukin couldn't see Jian Wushuang's speed clearly. Only Wu Li vaguely grasped it. The Empress on the throne wore an expression of disbelief. It wasn't that Jian Wushuang was exceptionally fast, but time seemed to slow down around everyone else. Only the Empress was unaffected, allowing her to clearly witness Jian Wushuang's tactics. Shizhou's expression changed drastically as he sensed the void force behind him. Although he didn't understand why Jian Wushuang suddenly appeared behind him, he still bravely launched an elbow strike. Crack! Jian Wushuang caught it with one hand, shaking his head. "Too weak," he remarked. Crunch! With a slight squeeze of his hand, he crushed Shizhou's arm. With 200,000-fold divine powers at its peak, Jian Wushuang's hand treated Shizhou's arm like a mere ant. In the origin source world, half of the universe illuminated, sparkling with boundless origin source power. Once these powers entered the dark starry sky, they transformed into the power of the stars. Jian Wushuang now was completely different from before. Previously, he borrowed the power of the starry sky, but now he could gather it himself. It was similar to mastering the power of all things in the past, slowly becoming familiar with it. However, the power of all things now was more suitable for assisting. The power of the starry sky was the strongest. "Ha!" Jian Wushuang burst out, grabbing Shizhou's neck with one hand and the shattered arm with the other, pulling forcefully. Rip! He tore the arm directly off. An eye for an eye. Shizhou's face instantly turned pale, and his divine power became somewhat unstable. He hadn't expected to be easily overwhelmed by just a glance. Was this the other power that Jian Wushuang had mentioned before? It was too powerful. He had never felt it even in the Tribulation Realm. Outside the barrier, Princess Jincheng became worried when she saw Shizhou injured. They were supposed to win, but Jian Wushuang seemed like a completely different person now. His strength utterly incomprehensible and somewhat terrifying. Even Wu Li couldn't help but swallow hard. The power before him exceeded his imagination. His previous speculations had been somewhat conservative. If he were to face Jian Wushuang now, he feared he wouldn't stand much of a chance. It was too terrifying. His divine power seemed so feeble in the face of Jian Wushuang. "You've lost." Jian Wushuang didn't press further, but with a single palm strike, he sent Shizhou flying 100 feet away. That last strike had pierced straight through Shizhou's chest. Even his silver battle armor had completely shattered. Struggling to rise, Shizhou attempted to mimic Jian Wushuang's posture to regenerate his arm, but then he realized abruptly that his current strength was entirely derived from forbidden techniques. There was no surplus vitality left to replenish his physical body. With only one arm remaining, Shizhou had no hope left. His divine power couldn't even be sustained at its peak anymore, and even at its peak it was crushed by Jian Wushuang. The current Jian Wushuang exuded overwhelming oppression. Wrapped in a faint blue aura, arcs of blue lightning flickered around him. Even his hair was blue. Though his aura wasn't sharp, the immense power made it impossible for his opponent to catch a breath. It was an absolute oppression, the purest form of suppression. Too strong. Although I can't discern the extent of his divine power, being able to easily defeat Shizhou, who possesses 200,000-fold divine power, means he's probably not weaker than a universe master, perhaps even stronger. Shirhan's gaze was deep, his tone filled with despair for Shizhou. Fortunately, Jian Wushuang didn't deliver the killing blow. Without a doubt, Shizhou, being weaker, was doomed. We won. Elder Mukin shifted from despair to excitement. This time, it was Shizhou who felt hopeless. Today, Jian Wushuang became famous in one battle, not only within the Yu Kingdom but would also be renowned throughout the entire ancient Wood continent. The heaven-defying emperor. It could even be said that he was the strongest heaven-defying emperor in the entire ancient Wood continent. They simply couldn't fathom which emperor could defeat Jian Wushuang now. Even Princess Jincheng, who harbored some hatred towards Jian Wushuang, deep down believed that Jian Wushuang was undoubtedly the strongest emperor in the ancient Wood continent. There was no one else. As for the entire ancient moon spacetime, it was too vast, and they didn't dare to guarantee anything about it. But after witnessing Jian Wushuang's true strength, they also felt that Jian Wushuang could at least rank in the top 10. The strength described by the rumored nearly invincible high priest wasn't much different from Jian Wushuang's current strength. Facing Shizhou with his 200,000-fold divine power, he easily overwhelmed him. This level of combat power was no different from that of the Universe Master. "I've lost," Shizhou said despondently, but his divine power was still rising. Although he admitted defeat verbally, there was still persistence in his heart. Obviously, he wouldn't give up easily. Jian Wushuang landed slowly, walked up unhurriedly, hands casually crossed over his chest, and said, "Actually, you can give up now. I promised her that I would give it my all, even if it meant enduring endless tribulations. I must keep this promise." Shizhou turned to look at Princess Jincheng outside the barrier, his eyes full of tenderness. But Princess Jincheng's eyes turned red. She really wanted Shizhou to give up. "Stop pushing yourself like this. Even if Jian Wushuang didn't kill him, continuing like this would still lead to certain death." Even Jian Wushuang was somewhat moved, staring at Shizhou's miserable appearance, reminiscent of the past. He had been so persistent once too. But later, he realized that such persistence was futile in this matter. Only by transforming this kind of persistence into cultivation would there be results. If Shizhou were in the Tribulation realm, a powerhouse at the level of the Seven Tribulations realm, would he be in such a sorry state? Who in the Yu Kingdom would dare to stop him? Within the royal family, the ancestor who founded the Yu Kingdom was nothing more than a feeble scattered tribulation expert on the brink of death. If confronted with a universe master at the Seven Tribulation realm, they wouldn't dare to obstruct, fearing they might even send Jinshin over as a gift. Though his persistence was misplaced, Jian Wushuang admired Shizhou. "If only I could be as carefree as you." But then again, it was a past best left unexamined. Jian Wushuang looked up, avoiding eye contact with Shizhou, and pretended to be casual, saying, "I will respect you, but don't think I'll hold back." He was determined to secure a spot in the sacred assembly. Using the Wanlu divine tree was his great opportunity. Across the distant expanse of starry sky, there lay a feeble temporal river waiting for him to rescue. He couldn't disappoint the hopes of countless people, nor could he afford to be soft-hearted. Shizhou steadied himself, his divine power rapidly increasing. It seemed he was about to use that move. "Jian Wushuang, I admit you are strong now, stronger than I imagined. But the move I'm about to unleash will cost me my life. Brace yourself." Shizhou laughed maniacally, a blazing light bursting from his body. In the light, His eyes glanced one last time at Princess Jinchen of the Yu Kingdom. It was as if he was bidding farewell. Jian Wushuang's expression changed, angrily shouting, "Have you gone mad?" This was going to be a fight to the death, and he would be trading his own life for Shizhou's. In the flickering light, Shizhou was left with only one arm, his feet hovering in the air. With a clenched fist, he shouted loudly, "Annihilation! Buzz!" The space shattered instantly, and Jian Wushuang shielded his face with both hands, bracing himself. He wasn't worried about himself. But Shizhou truly didn't need to do this. Even if he married into the royal family, he wouldn't share a room with Jinchen. After participating in the sacred assembly, if he could successfully activate the Wanlu divine tree, he would most likely flee with Wu Li. He would return when his strength was formidable enough, opening and activating the Wanlu Willow divine tree. On the surface, the ancient Wood sect wouldn't interfere, but behind the scenes, countless eyes would be watching. Opening it wasn't easy. Killing and plundering would be much simpler. So, it was certain he'd have to lay low for a while. Even if he didn't hide, he'd leave the ancient Wood continent and head to other regions within the 9 heavens and 10 lands, to find the 10 disciples of Qishan Temple who had come with him initially. Then they would venture together. It wasn't that Jian Wushuang didn't trust the people in the ancient moon spacetime, but it was unnecessary. No matter how powerful they were, they wouldn't travel thousands of miles with him to the temporal river of the original universe to save it. To practitioners in the ancient moon spacetime, that place was remote with no treasures or opportunities. Who would spend a long time wandering there? Only those who came from Qishan Temple like them would care about their homeland spacetime. They were all fighting hard. How could Jian Wushuang dare not to? His strongest opponent was Mieshang, still waiting for him. A surging force struck, but Jian Wushuang was completely enveloped by the power of the starry sky, unafraid. In his peak state, even if he fought against the universe master, he wouldn't suffer. Ah! Shizhou roared to the sky, his hand clenched into a fist, unleashing the power of prohibition, which transformed into annihilation. Crackling, the barrier shattered instantly. Empress Fengqian personally intervened, suppressing the violent aura. But this left Jian Wushuang in a dire situation. If Shizhou's attack had dispersed completely, it would have been fine. But the range within the barrier was too small, coupled with the Empress's suppression, causing the burst of aura to directly crush the space. Both Jian Wushuang and Shizhou fell into the chaotic flow of spacetime, a colorful world resembling countless mirrors. What a lunatic! Jian Wushuang's aura surged once again, completely resisting. Waves of heat struck, but they couldn't harm him in the slightest. Jian Wushuang watched the madness consuming Shizhou, sighing and shaking his head. The other's age might have been much greater than his own, but his state of mind seemed lacking. He was undeniably bold, but it had never occurred to him that even if he were to risk everything to change places with him, the royal family would still arrange for someone to marry Princess Jincheng. Wouldn't that be benefiting someone else for nothing? Why go to such lengths? The terrifying force sweeping over them began to gradually weaken. Shizhou's physical body began to petrify, cracks appearing on his divine body freezing as they emerged. His life force had been drained, and what followed would be death. Once the divine body was done for, the remaining origin source wouldn't be able to withstand such backlash. This was a spacetime dominated by divine power. The divine body was the strongest foundation. Once it was gone, even keeping the origin source would be futile. Just like Bai Junwang, without the origin source, having only the divine body was no different from being useless. You how? Shizhou's face turned ashen. He was about to perish, yet Jian Wushuang's aura showed no sign of change. The blue electric arcs around him flickered even more intensely. This time, Shizhou was utterly desperate. He had fought with all his might, but he couldn't even touch Jian Wushuang. Fortunately, they were within the barrier. If it weren't for the barrier, he wouldn't have been able to go all out against Jian Wushuang. But it was a pity. Even within the barrier, he couldn't do anything to Jian Wushuang. Moreover, Jian Wushuang seemed completely unscathed. He could no longer gauge Jian Wushuang's true strength. It was rumored that even the great high priest couldn't match Jian Wushuang. The power of complete prohibition, erupting with the force of annihilation, could slay the universe masters. And in such a confined space, even the top experts among the universe masters would have perished. Yet Jian Wushuang seemed unaffected. His aura showed no signs of weakening. Instead, it grew stronger. Such was the terror of the power of the starry sky. In fact, the force of annihilation unleashed by Shiju just now could threaten Jian Wushuang. However, it was like an ant compared to the power of the starry sky. Moreover, his force of annihilation was released from the power of prohibition, so there wasn't much of it, and he would suffer backlash afterward. But Jian Wushuang was different. The power of the starry sky was transformed from the origin source, seemingly endless. How could they be compared? Jian Wushuang shook his head gently. This wasn't a fight to the death. If it were, Shiju would have died 10,000 times over already. His body completely petrified. Shiju, before losing consciousness, exerted the last bit of his divine power to leave Jian Wushuang with a final sentence. "Take care of her for me." With those words, Shiju's physical and divine bodies completely turned into stone. Only the origin source remained, resisting stubbornly but unable to hold out for much longer. "Enough!" the Empress exclaimed lightly, extending her jade-like hand. A surge of vitality flowed into Shiju's body, protecting the last remaining origin source within him. With a gentle stroke of her fingers, she tore open a rift in space-time. "Take him back to the Shi Kingdom quickly. There might still be a chance." The Empress turned to Shi Han and said, "If we delay any longer, even if he survives, he will be nothing but a cripple." Upon hearing this, Shi Han hurried over, grabbing the petrified Shiju and entered the rift in space-time directly. "Brother Zhou." Princess Jinshan wanted to follow, but was stopped by the Empress. Jian Wushuang stood aside, feeling somewhat awkward. He had never imagined that one day he would be breaking up a couple. Fortunately, he wasn't petty and wouldn't kick someone when they were down. Even if he were to marry into the royal family and become Princess Jinshan's Dao companion, he wouldn't harbor any inappropriate thoughts towards her. The crucial point was that by then, it wouldn't be inappropriate thoughts anymore, but a legitimate relationship. Even so, Jian Wushuang wouldn't touch her. He only wanted to become stronger, to deal with the trouble of Mieshang, and then to follow his master's path, to meet with teacher Xianyi in the future, to see what lay in the future world, what was hidden within the starry sky, who was plotting within it. Princess Jinshan knelt on the ground, crying miserably, tears streaming down her face. She lifted her little head and stared at her cold-hearted mother, crying out bitterly, "Why are you forcing me? The matter is settled. Forget about him." The Empress's voice was icy, leaving no room for negotiation. Even she couldn't bear to see her daughter like this. And there stood Jian Wushuang, looking at his tall and straight figure, his face radiant and handsome. Why insist on Shiju? He was indeed outstanding, with background and strength, willing to risk his life for Jinshan. But what good would that do? Strength is paramount. Don't be ridiculous. She was an experienced person, aware of what the Tribulation Realm entailed. The pressure that the Emperor hadn't faced yet would erupt in Tribulation Realm. Once in a certain tribulation, she would probably regret it for the rest of her life. A Dao companion was just a momentary thing. Strength was for a lifetime. Jian Wushuang's excellence surpassed all expectations, especially coupled with a princess from the Yu Kingdom. If news of this battle were to spread, Jian Wushuang's influence would likely extend far beyond the realms, overshadowing even the Yu Kingdom. As a Yu Kingdom princess, even if she were to inherit the Imperial Emperor's throne in the future, it wouldn't amount to much compared to the 7 major sects on the ancient Wood continent. This time, they had hit the jackpot by joining forces with Jian Wushuang. Jian Wushuang's background wasn't particularly complex. Wu Li had mentioned that Jian Wushuang couldn't make ends meet in the outer domain and was on the brink of poverty before seeking refuge with the Wu family in the Yu Kingdom. Even if Jian Wushuang reached the 5th Tribulation Realm in the future, they wouldn't be able to interfere with the royal family of the Yu Kingdom without external intervention. They had gained a top-notch fighter for free. Even the Empress felt like she had hit the jackpot this time. Phew! Jian Wushuang took a slight breath and returned to normal. Looking at Princess Jincheng in front of him, he didn't know what to say. He could only turn around and slightly salute the Empress. "Your Majesty, what do you think?" His meaning was clear. How should they conclude this matter? Would King take Jian Wushuang to settle in the capital first? "We'll discuss the rest of the matters in 3 days. Empress Fengqian also understood that it wasn't appropriate to discuss previous agreements at this moment. It was better to wait for her daughter to recover and then take things slowly. The Sacred Assembly was still 10 years away. They aimed to settle everything within that time frame. Upon hearing this, Mukin quickly stepped forward, pulling Jian Wushuang along and replied, "Your Majesty, rest assured, this minister will handle it properly. Nephew Wushuang, come with me." Jian Wushuang bid farewell with a bow and followed Mukin, preparing to leave. However, as he passed through the threshold, he turned his head to glance at the 3 emperors remaining in the hall. These 3 individuals were summoned by Elder Mukin. Instead of following them now, he was left behind. Perhaps the Empress also sensed the death power wielded by 2 of the emperors. Jian Wushuang wasn't in a hurry. Bringing it up now would raise suspicion. He would inquire with Elder Mukin later. If he were detained by the Empress, he could still inquire in the future after becoming part of the family. So he followed Mukin and Wu Li as they left the palace together. "Brother Mukin, there's no need to rush. After all, he's my nephew. I can handle it. I'll bring him to your mansion in 3 days." Wu Li politely refused Elder Mukin's offer and took Jian Wushuang back to their previous residence. After entering the mansion, both Wu Li and Jian Wushuang breathed a sigh of relief. That old guy, he hasn't even married in yet, but he's already thinking about moving into the Wood King's mansion. He really underestimates our Wu family. Wu Li's face showed some anger. Clearly, he was holding some grudges. Even if it's marrying a maid, he wouldn't stay at someone else's house before the wedding. Not to mention, Jian Wushuang is an extraordinary emperor. This time, the royal family can enjoy it in secret. "Brother Wu Li, why bother with worldly appearances? Once the Wanlu divine tree is activated, what are these royal dynasties and sects? It's just my worldly concerns. But this Yu Kingdom royal family is really not a good bunch. Be careful when you marry into it in the future." The 2 entered a secluded courtyard and settled beneath a willow tree, with a finely carved tea pavilion before them. Wu Li skillfully brewed tea, while Jian Wushuang savored it slowly. Jian Wushuang empathized with Wu Li's backbiting about the royal family. If their identities were swapped and he were Shizhou, it would likely infuriate him. Or perhaps if he were Princess Jinchen. Although he found the other party overly persistent, he couldn't imagine enduring it himself. A poor boy encountering a young lady, one must consider social status. With their talents and looks, one worries about others stealing their nests. This situation was simply too convoluted. Moreover, Shizhou had gone all out. If it were for the wealth of Yu Kingdom, why not contend for the throne of Shi Kingdom? As far as he knew, the current ruler of Shi Kingdom was not Shizhou. It was Shizhou's elder brother, although also at the Tribulation Realm, his strength was generally underestimated. It was highly probable that he would specialize in scattered tribulation in the future. In this case, the throne was vacant. If Shizhou fully supported Shizhou, there was great hope. Shizhou's peak combat power, if it could reach 180,000-fold, would be almost certain. Though 190,000-fold was somewhat strained, it wasn't his own divine power, so he didn't calculate it. With 180,000-fold in combat power, the Emperor would become the Universe Master, which could be considered a foregone conclusion. Coupled with Shizhou's nurturing, reaching the 4 Tribulation Realm would not be difficult. Reaching the 5 Tribulation Realm would require some external opportunities. Shizhou also bore the aura of great fortune, the pride of the heavens. Reaching the 5 Tribulation Realm might not be impossible. One could say that Shizhou was the seed of the 5 Tribulation Realm. It's a pity. He wondered if he could recover before the Sacred Assembly. Wu Li poured tea for Jian Wushuang while remarking, "To speak bluntly, If I were the Empress, seeing Shi Zhou's performance today would have melted even a heart of stone. Yet, she just opened a back door and let Shi Han take Shi Zhou away, without a word of comfort. Emperors are capricious. They're often heartless, Jian Wushuang commented. The sentiment, applicable even in the mundane world, held true in the present. Indeed, Wu Li nodded in agreement. Jian Wushuang set down his teacup, adopting a serious tone. Let's focus on the important matters. There shouldn't be any issues with the seats for the sacred assembly this time, right? Don't worry about that. If the royal family doesn't grant them, we'll call off the marriage, Wu Li assured, thumping his chest. In truth, Jian Wushuang was also unlucky not to notice Wu Li's short-sightedness. Had his true strength been revealed earlier, even Qingyun's sect would have secured him a seat. But unraveling all his secrets within a mere millennium was no easy task. Despite Wu Li's short-sightedness, his strategic planning was meticulous. Over the course of a millennium, he had crafted Jian Wushuang's identity flawlessly. From a destitute family to venturing through numerous epochs in the outer domain and returning to Yu Kingdom to seek refuge with the Wu family. Moreover, Wu Li had deliberately arranged for traces of Jian Wushuang's existence to remain. Although Jian Wushuang had only been a minor steward of Qingyun's sect, his background had still been investigated. Now, marrying into the royal family, the other party might be investigating his background at this very moment. With Wu Li's arrangements, Jian Wushuang had no worries. Without a deeply rooted family to vouch for him, infiltrating the core would be difficult. Even if he were extraordinary, his ambiguous identity would raise suspicion, hindering his advancement. Especially with powers like the Yu Kingdom's royal family, distrust was rampant. There shouldn't be any problems. But there's one thing you need to be mindful of. I've heard that a certain ancient ancestor of the Yu Kingdom might awaken soon, and it might have something to do with your marriage into the family. Impossible. I'm just an emperor. Would that ancient ancestor even care? Jian Wushuang exclaimed in disbelief. As an emperor marrying into a royal family, he was merely a son-in-law. It was surprising that they would take an interest in him. Wu Li continued, Right now, I'm worried that he might notice something, like the fact that neither of us have any bloodline. That was something they couldn't fake. There's nothing to worry about. My physical body is quite special, capable of changing into all things. Even a 7 Tribulation Realm expert wouldn't be able to detect any issues. Jian Wushuang was confident in his own physique. Although in the Moro spacetime, he didn't follow the path of cultivating the physical body. But he still had his own methods for refining the body. After the 10 rounds of tempering, he had surpassed the peak of Moro spacetime. Even in the ancient moon spacetime, his physical body's perfection could easily rank in the top 3 among peers. Claiming the top spot was a bit exaggerated. Jian Wushuang wasn't as confident as Wu Li. Besides this, there's nothing else to worry about. Once that old ancestor revives, he will most likely head to the sacred assembly. Although those in the scattered Tribulation Realm experts cannot participate in the assembly, observing would still be a good choice. Wu Li breathed a sigh of relief, his confidence returning. He had faith in his own arrangements. Wasn't success imminent now? Secure the spot and wait for the sacred assembly 10 years later. Then, activate the Wanlu and ascend to the peak. All right, Jian Wushuang didn't dwell on it further. He would take it step by step. As for the 2 emperors related to the power of death, he didn't mention them to Wu Li. Though they were on the same boat, their relationship hadn't reached that point yet. Besides, it wasn't Wu Li's concern. The matter of the power of death was crucial as it involved the future. He needed to pay attention to it. He would wait until 3 days later to meet Elder Mukin and probe further. The main priority was to activate the Wanlu. The power of death came next. If he could gather information along the way, he wouldn't consider it troublesome. It's uncertain whether this power of death is related to Mieshang. If it is, then the other party's influence is quite extensive. Under the willow tree, 3 days passed quickly. During these 3 days, Wu Li didn't leave. He just kept playing with the tea set and chatting with Jian Wushuang. An old man and a young man, they discussed cultivation and legends. When they finally talked about women, they mentioned the same name. Empress Fengchen. Both men revealed peculiar smiles, then abruptly stopped. Just as they were about to head to the Wood King's mansion, Elder Mukin personally arrived. Elder Mukin, you're too polite. Since you're here, come on in, and you've brought something. Wu Li said, his words polite but his actions sincere, directing the steward to lead the way inside. Jian Wushuang didn't mind. The treasures sent over were not simple, but unfortunately, they were all divine treasures, which he didn't need at all. He couldn't even digest the bones of Dong Jun, let alone have time to absorb those divine treasures. His progress was too slow. To attain basic divine power and reach the level of the 3 tribulation realm, it might take forever. He couldn't discern the true strength of Dong Jun's bones. At least, it was the bones of a 7 tribulation realm expert. Within the skeletal remains, there was an extremely rich divine power. Although the original body had perished, the flesh and bones remained incorruptible. Only the flesh had been refined, leaving behind the bones and the internal divine power. Jian Wushuang only needed to integrate it into his divine body to quickly break through his divine power to over 200,000-fold. Perhaps even more. He had never heard of anyone absorbing an entire 7 tribulation realm divine body before. Nor did he know how much it would ultimately elevate him. After settling matters of face, Elder Mukin sat in the main seat, calmly sipping his tea. With solemnity, he said, Brother Wu Li, today, on behalf of the Chun clan, I've come to propose a marriage. How would you like to arrange this union? Well, as you know, I only have one nephew. He's been lonely since childhood, and after obtaining a great opportunity in the outer domain and being chased by others, he sought refuge in Yu Kingdom. Surprisingly, the young man caught the eye of the princess. Since His Majesty favors this, how could we dare to object? Wu Li spoke humbly, elevating Elder Mukin and the entire royal family, almost making Jian Wushuang sound like a beggar. In that case, let me propose a bride price. Rest assured it's 1.8 million. It will be delivered immediately. As for the wedding day, let's set it 3 years from now. How does that sound? Mukin was also generous, knowing well what Jian Wushuang desired. Standing behind Wu Li, Jian Wushuang, besides showing respect by serving tea and water as a junior, also listened to their conversation. When he heard the sum of 1.8 million, his expression shifted. 1.8 million, if it was in universe crystals, wasn't it a bit too little? Elder Mukin could easily receive tens of millions of universe crystals during a grand birthday celebration. This time, offering only 1.8 million was truly underestimating him. Although he wasn't a member of the Wu family, he still found this matter outrageous. Clearly, they looked down on him. He was marrying into the family, sacrificing himself for the royal clan. When Wu Li heard this, his expression also darkened slightly, just like Jian Wushuang's. But he understood that these were trivial matters. The most important thing was the spot in the sacred assembly. One couldn't ruin the big picture over a small matter. Does it matter? Wu Li probed. I've heard that the envoys from the ancient Wood sect have arrived recently. I wonder how many spots Yu Kingdom managed to secure this time. Although Mukin had mentioned it during Jian Wushuang's confrontation with Shurjiu, he still needed assurance. If there were no spots, it would be better to switch allegiances now. Upon hearing this, Mukin reached into his pocket and pulled out a token from among the mustard seeds. Smiling, Brother Wu Li, take a look at this. Seeing the token, Wu Li's expression softened, and he directly took it from Elder Mukin's hand. 2 tokens. 1 gold, representing the tribulation realm. 1 silver, representing the emperor. Qualifications for the sacred assembly. Already obtained. 1 was for Wu Li himself and the other was for Jian Wushuang. Wu Li held the token, his face beaming with joy, as he handed the emperor's token to Jian Wushuang and tucked his own into his bosom. Brother Mukin, you've given me a great surprise today. The qualification for the sacred assembly, he had actually obtained it long ago. Under normal circumstances, the royal family wouldn't allocate spots to them. But today they were given a token for the Tribulation Realm's sacred assembly. In other words, the Wu family had gained an extra spot. How could this not make Wu Li happy? Although there were no suitable candidates for the Tribulation Realm in the current generation of the Wu family, Wu Li could sell this token for a high price. It was definitely worth a fortune. What's a mere 1.8 million universe crystals? Mukin smiled and said, "This token was given by His Majesty, considering the face of Wushuang's nephew. You must cherish it." "No problem with that," Wu Li assured, patting his chest. He understood Mukin's meaning. Mukin could give him this token, but he needed to pull in a strong ally. Empress Fengqian would also participate in this sacred assembly. She needed help. With the marriage alliance between the Wu family and the royal family, they naturally sailed on the same boat. This token couldn't be given lightly. It required finding a strong ally to assist the Empress in seizing the position of the Holy Maiden. In doing so, the price would also decrease significantly. Still, Wu Li was quite pleased. He had originally planned to mobilize the power of his clan to search for a token qualifying for the Tribulation Realm, but now that wasn't necessary. Why wouldn't he keep some cards up his sleeve for activating the Wanlu? This token was like a divine aid. Elder Mukin was also delighted. This time, their royal clan had obtained many tokens, which was quite unusual. It was also to win over Jian Wushuang to the Wu family. In that case, I hope Brother Wu Li will also give us a surprise when the time comes. Elder Mukin raised an eyebrow, seemingly disappointed, and said, "This upcoming sacred assembly is unprecedented. We must not be careless." Wu Li also followed up, "Everything has its own destiny. The ancient Wood continent is currently silent. It's time to liven things up a bit. In the 9 heavens and 10 earths, we're already at the bottom of the countdown. It's all the same. The most powerful era in the ancient moon spacetime is always in the past. The 8 tribulation realms of that era were truly abundant. The ancestors still reminisce about the fallen era when the celestial maiden perished. After her fall, like spring shoots after rain, numerous 8 tribulation realm powerhouses emerged. Unfortunately, each generation is inferior to the last." Elder Mukin's face carried a nostalgic expression. Jian Wushuang listened carefully from the side. The fallen era. It was what happened after the Celestial Maiden created the ancient moon spacetime and then fell. After the Celestial Maiden's fall, as a powerhouse who had completed the 9 tribulations, the paths she scattered forged a group of powerful 8 tribulation realm experts. These experts established the ancient moon divine sect, among which the strongest 19 created 19 8-star sections. The legacy continued through the ages. Among them was the once illustrious divine Wood King. However, its strength was at the bottom of the list. Because resources in the ancient Wood continent were scarce, with only the Wanlu Willow Divine Wood being relatively rare and special, unfortunately not under the control of the ancient Wood sect. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been so poorly off, even compared to the flame god of the Sure Kingdom. In the current era, the universe masters of the 8 tribulation realm are almost extinct. There are probably only a few left in the entire ancient moon spacetime. Many have even left the ancient moon spacetime. For Jian Wushuang, this place was formidable. But the universe masters of the 8th tribulation realm could see it. The ancient moon spacetime, like the strong of the scattered tribulation realm, has lost its vitality. Staying here, one can only wait for death. It's better to venture into other temporal rivers. The 9 core temporal rivers, and the boundless starry sky. That's where they truly belong. Tribulation realm powerhouses shouldn't be bound by the temporal rivers. Of course, one must have the strength to venture out. Someone like Jian Wushuang doesn't need much mention, being just an emperor. Even for a 5 tribulation realm powerhouse, it's very dangerous to venture into other temporal rivers. They can only stay in the ancient moon spacetime. The despair of the scattered tribulation realm is such that they can only go into a slumber. Their origin sources are severed, their vitality lost. For those peak powerhouses, it's a nightmare. Ordinary scattered tribulation realm strongholds can still hold on. But the 8th tribulation realm powerhouses can't endure. Many 8th tribulation realm powerhouses have fallen along with the universe. Just like Qixin, Jian Wushuang also didn't want to face the prospect of losing his origin source. Of course, looking at it now, Qixin had another plan in mind. However, Jian Wushuang didn't know exactly what the other party was scheming. If Qixin succeeded, it would probably be an unprecedented disaster. Reviving the scattered tribulation, that wasn't something that could be accomplished simply by injecting life power. What was needed was the source, not just infinite life power. Jian Wushuang deeply understood this point. In the future, when he had enough strength to return to Qixin Temple, he must explore Qixin's scheme. Well, I won't disturb you anymore, but nephew Wushuang, come with me for a moment. I have some things to arrange. Elder Mukin stood up, preparing to leave with Jian Wushuang. Wu Li also had no objections. After sending the two out, he returned to the mansion with a sense of satisfaction, using a hidden teleportation array to leave the capital directly and return to the Wu family. Because his trump card was hidden there. On Jian Wushuang's side, he followed Elder Mukin to the Wood King's mansion. The two found a quaint and elegant courtyard with maidservants serving, and outside the pavilion, there was a tranquil lake. Nephew Wushuang, just say whatever you need to say. Elder Mukin waved his hand to dismiss the maidservant, then continued. We're practically family now. If there's anything you want to hide from Wu Li, you can tell me any time. Jian Wushuang smiled with narrowed eyes. In the mansion of the Wu family, he communicated with Elder Mukin and asked him to take him away from the Wu mansion. At such a critical moment, leaving alone might arouse suspicion from Wu Li, so he asked Elder Mukin to take him out and also tried to get closer to him. He wanted to inquire about the two emperors related to the power of death. This time, thanks to Elder Mukin, I have something in mind. I want to discuss it with that uncle of mine. Jian Wushuang's careful weaving of words captivated Elder Mukin. At the end of Jian Wushuang's recounting, Elder Mukin reacted immediately. What? He exclaimed. You encountered that kind of power in the outer domain? Elder Mukin couldn't believe it. Since both of those emperors were brought by him, Jian Wushuang decided to reveal the matter after withholding it, and explained the situation to Elder Mukin. Elder Mukin also understood what that kind of power represented, hence his astonishment. So, Elder Mukin also knows. Jian Wushuang's heart stirred, realizing there were things he didn't know. Now, it remained to be seen if he could explode with more information this time. Elder Mukin settled back down, reclining in his chair, recalling the words of Emperor Fengqin, and without any concealment, he recounted everything. He had thought Jian Wushuang already knew, so he spoke openly. Jian Wushuang, however, exclaimed in amazement, Indeed, my speculation was correct. There must be someone manipulating behind these two. From Elder Mukin, Jian Wushuang learned about the secret of the power of death in the ancient moon spacetime. This secret was known to very few people, not even some in the tribulation realm knew about it. Only the leaders of some major forces were aware of it. Emperor Fengqin also learned about it from the ancestor of the royal family of Yu Kingdom. The power of death in the ancient moon spacetime was not called the power of death. It was called the power of annihilation. When the celestial maiden fell, there was an instance of the power of annihilation. That time marked the peak of the tribulation realm in the ancient moon spacetime, and it was the closest they came to death. The power of annihilation appeared. The 9 heavens and 10 lands fell into a dire situation. Among the 10 lands, 3 continents became ruins. Only 8 major sects remained, along with some hidden realms, while the rest were all destroyed, leaving only rubble behind. In the 9 heavens, cracks began to appear everywhere. Both in scope and heritage, they suffered significant impacts. Many people didn't know why these ruins appeared, thinking it was always like that. In reality, it was the emergence of the power of annihilation. Subsequent occurrences had happened before, but none were as terrifying, with much less destruction. It wasn't until now that the power of annihilation completely disappeared, although occasionally, people would discover remnants of death power in the ruins of some fallen spacetimes, but it was only remnants. Some people sought to grasp this power, only to find that once tainted, it would devour the vitality within them, requiring countless life power to expel. Afterward, no one dared to touch this power again. Especially for those who had survived tribulations, their vitality was already limited. making it incredibly difficult to recover. Once exposed to the death power, there was a risk of falling into a deep slumber or even extinction. Jian Wushuang sighed inwardly. If Miashang were to arrive here, he would probably laugh himself awake from dreaming. He controlled the existence of death power, even though his strength was only at the half-step 7 tribulation realm. He could still threaten those stronger than him at the 8th tribulation realm. Apart from the universe masters, everyone feared the power of death. Even the universe masters didn't want to be tainted by this power. This also made Jian Wushuang curious. If it was indeed Miashang's doing, then Miashang had existed for too long. From the era of the ancient moon spacetime's downfall to the later Moro spacetime, and even the spacetime of the original universe, the span was too vast. Adding to that, there was Dong Jun Jian Wushuang couldn't even begin to calculate. If it were true, then Miashang must have been incredibly powerful, having evolved to the present still only at the 6th tribulation realm. Moreover, there was hope for improvement, perhaps not much different from the universe master, because he inherently represented death. As long as he devoured Jian Wushuang, the fusion of death and life, it might reach a new level, surpassing the existence of the 9 tribulation realm. Thinking of this, Jian Wushuang shook his head vigorously. Absolutely impossible. If it were true, then it would be the end for the spacetime of the original universe. By then, everyone would perish. The power of Miashang was a disaster in the starry sky. He must figure out where these 2 emperors obtained the power of death. Otherwise, he would not feel comfortable staying in the ancient moon spacetime. He couldn't afford to let Miashang find him again, or there would be nowhere to hide. After all, he came to the ancient moon spacetime to escape from Miashang. Elder Mukin, how does His Majesty intend to deal with these 2? Jian Wushuang probed. Elder Mukin sighed. They are talents I found from the Yongheng Kingdom. All geniuses within the Yongheng Kingdom. It's impossible to deal with them. The overall strength of the Yongheng Kingdom is much stronger than Yu Kingdom. The Sacred Assembly is about to arrive. His Majesty won't offend them at this time. The Yongheng Kingdom. Jian Wushuang nodded. It was a kingdom comparable to the Shi Kingdom, and the strong of the Yongheng clan were notorious lunatics. Although the 2 emperors were not of the Yongheng clan, they were core disciples of the Yongheng Kingdom, also geniuses. They couldn't be detained for too long, or it would arouse their suspicion. They would probably be released in a few days. Empress Fengqian went to contend for the position of Holy Maiden, and cooperation with the Yongheng Kingdom would be inevitable. Offending them at this time might cause trouble for her. Although there was no suitable candidate for Holy Maiden in the Yongheng Kingdom, they could still influence the situation. If the other party fully supports the Empress, they will also lean towards her. The Yu Kingdom still had its limits. Well then, let's discuss this later, Jian Wushuang said on the surface, but deep down he didn't give up. Instead, he instructed Elder Mukin to make sure to inform him before the other party left the Yu Kingdom. Thinking that Jian Wushuang was going to inquire about matters in the outer domain with those 2, Elder Mukin didn't think much about it and just saw Jian Wushuang off. When Jian Wushuang returned to the Wu family mansion, he didn't sense Wu Li's presence, which surprised him. Alone in the room for a while, a familiar presence appeared again, and soon he found him. Wushuang, you're back so soon. That Mukin guy. Really? Why couldn't things be discussed at the Wu family mansion? Wu Li entered the room with a somewhat gloomy expression, then continued. He still doesn't consider me one of his own. Jian Wushuang smiled helplessly. Brother Wu Li, you've made quite a profit this time. Don't take advantage and act coy, or you might get on Mukin's bad side if he finds out. Haha, it's just you and me here. How could he find out? Wu Li looked meaningfully at Jian Wushuang, as if saying they were in the same boat. But understanding Jian Wushuang's point, he got straight to the point. Indeed, we made a small profit this time. That token alone can be sold for this amount. However, the people we brought also require unconditional help from the Yu Kingdom, so the price is much lower. Otherwise, it could have been sold for a higher price. 300 million. Jian Wushuang was astonished. Even that was selling cheap. If they had bought it outright, it might have skyrocketed to 1 billion. Jian Wushuang ultimately obtained 200 million universe crystals out of the 300 million. He hadn't expected Wu Li to be so generous. He had thought they would split it evenly, but Wu Li had directly given him 200 million. These 200 million universe crystals were the greatest gain he had made since arriving in the ancient moon spacetime. A whopping 200 million universe crystals. If he were in the Qixin Temple, he wouldn't even know how long it would take to acquire them. However, the treasures he obtained in the Qixin Temple were beyond what universe crystals could measure. Like the Beast God weapon and Dong Jun's skeletal remains. These two treasures were beyond what universe crystals could quantify. In the ancient moon spacetime, they were also top-tier treasures. The Beast God weapon was a treasure of the 7 Tribulation Realm, crafted by Qixin himself. The 9 Beast God weapons represented the pinnacle of the entire Moro spacetime. Jian Wushuang only obtained one of them, the Candle Dragon. The whereabouts of the other 8 are still unknown. Dong Jun's skeletal remains. At the very least, they were remains of the 7 Tribulation Realm, possibly even stronger. In the ancient moon spacetime, 7 Tribulation Realm entities were not uncommon. There had been several in the history of the Yu Kingdom alone. However, in the present era, there wasn't a single universe master of the 7 Tribulation Realm in the Yu Kingdom. Not even one universe master of the 6 Tribulation Realm. The strongest universe master of the current era was the Empress of the Yu Kingdom. As for the scattered tribulation, it's not worth mentioning. Too much vitality has been lost, making it impossible to compare with Dong Jun's skeletal remains. If Dong Jun's skeletal remains were revealed, the commotion it would cause would likely be more terrifying than that caused by 7 Tribulation treasures. After all, there were many treasures of the 7 Tribulation. But there weren't many skeletal remains of universe masters of the 7 Tribulation realm. Most people only got a piece of bone and cherished it as a treasure. In addition to these 2 treasures, Jian Wushuang possessed an even more powerful supreme treasure, the Sky-Sight Heavenly Chessboard, the temporal treasure left to him by teacher Xianxia. Back then, there weren't many temporal treasures in Moro spacetime. Qixin Temple should have one, and Mieshang as well, he had one too. When the higher heavens were broken, Qixin obtained a temporal treasure, and as for Mieshang, he probably obtained it even earlier. Lastly, there was the Sky-Sight Heavenly Chessboard left by the first true king, a temporal treasure arranged by teacher Xianxia. After Jian Wushuang obtained it, he had yet to truly activate it. The chess manual left by the first true king was of little use, he could only copy the origin source from it. Until now, Jian Wushuang hadn't figured out its purpose. Some of the highest level origin sources were of no use to him, and he had consumed a lot during the confrontation with Mieshang, swallowing up what was left. Now, he was copying some cosmic origin sources at the level of the 3 Tribulation Realm. It was called copying, but in fact, he was slowly devouring them. These origin sources currently serve 2 purposes. One was direct consumption, and the other was to inject vitality and manipulate chess pieces. After becoming an emperor, he could manipulate the highest level chess pieces and devour the origin sources of cosmic tribulations. Only when he reached the Tribulation Realm could he manipulate even stronger chess pieces, such as those with character titles. Each one was the origin source of a powerful being above the 3 Tribulation Realm. If he could inject vitality to restore their strength, it would be a great help to him. As for the chess pieces with general titles, he couldn't even copy them, let alone manipulate them. Those chess pieces were probably origin sources of cosmic tribulations of 7 Tribulation or above. Lastly, there were the chess pieces with divine titles. Those were the most powerful origin sources, with even more concentrated spacetime power above. Unfortunately, the current Jian Wushuang could only watch helplessly. He still needed to quickly enhance his origin source, to light up an entire universe as soon as possible. As he entered the Tribulation Realm, he aimed to swiftly ascend to the peak of the 3 Tribulation Realm. He directly created a universe. This was much more powerful compared to the universe masters who refined universes. Because of this, his Tao arena was in turmoil. The universe crystals sent by Wu Li could accelerate his cultivation speed. Moreover, he didn't hesitate to accept the treasures sent by Elder Mukin and asked Wu Li to exchange them for origin source treasures. Although Wu Li was somewhat surprised, he didn't dwell on it. He knew Jian Wushuang's divine power was extraordinary, probably already at the peak of an emperor, now wanting to cultivate the origin source, preparing the groundwork for future entry into the tribulation realm. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Jian Wushuang proposed going out for a stroll. With some universe crystals on hand, he intended to visit other kingdoms to purchase some treasures suitable for himself, preparing for future participation in the sacred assembly. "Do you need me to accompany you?" Wu Li politely asked. Jian Wushuang shook his head, replying, "No need, just buying some treasures." After all, there were still 3 years before he married into the royal family. It was normal for him to go out and purchase a batch of cultivation treasures. Wu Li was just being polite. He had important matters to attend to as well, so he didn't ask further. Then the two returned to their respective cultivations. Jian Wushuang didn't dare to waste a moment. He had made little progress in the past 10,000 years. He thought the matter of the sacred assembly would take a long time, but he didn't expect it to come so quickly. Now he could only rely on the speed of time flow to cultivate. Several days outside equated to several years for Jian Wushuang. A few days later, Jian Wushuang received a message from Elder Mukin. The two emperors had already left the imperial palace. Jian Wushuang opened his eyes and quietly left the Wu family residence. As soon as he left, Wu Li sensed it. Realizing he left quietly, Wu Li thought carefully. He must have gone to buy treasures, which was normal.